I was wiping the breakfast room table with the same damp dishcloth I had used every morning since Elaine died, when I saw her silver mirror on the front hall console. For a second, I did not understand what I was looking at. The light was still thin and gray, the kind that comes through old glass before the sun has committed itself, and the mirror caught just enough of it to flash once at me from across the hall like a signal. Elaine's mirror had not been downstairs in 3 years. I stood there with one hand flat on the table and the cloth hanging from the other, and something cold moved through me so quickly it felt less like fear than recognition. The house was quiet, except for the refrigerator hum and the little ticking complaint the dining room clock made before the hour. Coffee was dripping in the kitchen. I could smell bacon grease faintly from the skillet Caroline had used for Nora's breakfast, and beneath that, the cleaner she favored now, something citrus and sharp that always made me miss the gentler lemon polish Elaine used on wood. There was toast in the crumb tray. A blue backpack leaned against the mudroom door, where it had been dropped after school yesterday and not moved since. Ordinary mess. Ordinary life. That was the lie of it. The house looked full lived in, decently managed. But the mirror was wrong, and once I saw it, the wrongness spread. It was a small silver vanity mirror, old enough that its back had gone soft in places, and the frame had tiny black freckles where the finish had thinned. Elaine's mother had given it to her when we were first married. Elaine kept it on the vanity by the bedroom window upstairs and turned it toward the morning light every day before she made the bed. She said a bedroom ought to greet the day, even when the people in it didn't feel like it. I had smiled at that for 42 years. After she died, I left it where it was. I dusted around it. Once a week, I polished the frame with the cloth she kept in the top drawer. I never brought it downstairs. I crossed the breakfast room and stopped in the hall without touching it at first. The console table under it was one Elaine and I had bought from a couple downsizing in Dublin 20 years ago. Narrow maple, 2 small drawers just deep enough for mail and keys and gloves. Lately, it held more than that. Caroline's coupon envelopes sometimes. School forms, Nora's headband with the glitter stars that shed silver dust everywhere. A charger cord looped like a little black snake. The mirror sat among all of it, angled inward toward the house instead of toward the front windows. That was another wrongness. Elaine would never have set a mirror facing into a room unless she meant to use it. A mirror ought to catch light, not people when they aren't ready, she used to say. One of her little house rules. I had always thought of them as house rules. Nothing more. Standing there in the hall with the dishcloth cooling in my hand, I heard her voice so clearly I felt it in my chest. A mirror ought to catch light, not people when they aren't ready. I reached out and put 2 fingers to the silver edge. It was cool. There were smudges on the glass, low on the right-hand side, as if someone had held it there with a thumb. Dad. Caroline's voice came from the kitchen, brisk and morning soft at the same time. She had a way of sounding busy even when she was standing still. You want more coffee? I looked toward the doorway. Did you move this? The mirror? She came into view with her mug in one hand, dark hair pulled back, cardigan sleeves shoved to her forearms, every inch of her already arranged for the day. She was 44 and could still, from the right angle, resemble the girl who used to come down our stairs late for school with one shoe on and one in her hand. But there was nothing late or unfinished about Caroline anymore. She stood in the kitchen opening with her shoulders square, mug lifted in both hands, and looked at the mirror as if it barely deserved the attention. I just set it there for a minute yesterday while I was dusting upstairs, she said. I must have forgotten to take it back. I looked at her. She smiled a little. I know. Sacred object. My mistake. She meant it lightly. That was one of Caroline's gifts. She could make a correction sound like a joke, and a joke sound like you were the one taking things too hard. It belongs upstairs, I said. I'll put it back. There was nothing in her voice to argue with. That was another one of her gifts. The argument looked foolish before you even started it. She turned back toward the kitchen. Nora. Shoes, she called. In a minute, Nora said from somewhere unseen. I kept looking at the mirror. Maybe that ought to have been the end of it. A misplaced object, a daughter running a full house. My house, yes, but different now. Busier, child noisier, less ceremonious. There were all sorts of harmless explanations available to a man who wanted them badly enough. I had wanted harmless explanations for a long time. They made family life smoother. They kept gratitude from curdling into resentment. They helped a widower tell himself that letting his daughter and granddaughter move in after a rough season in her marriage and a harder season with money had been an act of mutual good and not the beginning of some quieter loss he did not know how to name. Still, I picked up the mirror with both hands and carried it to the foot of the stairs. It was heavier than it looked. Elaine had always said that was true of anything made properly. I stood there a moment listening. The upstairs was still. Floorboards, old plaster, the furnace sighing itself awake. In the kitchen, Caroline was packing Nora's lunch. I could hear the zip of the insulated bag, the cupboard door, the scrape of a chair. Down the hall, the front windows still held the weak morning. My own reflection flashed once in the glass of the framed print above the console table, an old man in a robe white at the temples, handkerchief already folded in his pocket, because habits outlast reasons. I started up the stairs. The runner creaked on the third step from the top as it had for years. Elaine always missed it somehow, and I never did. At the landing, the smell changed. Downstairs was coffee toast, citrus cleaner, school morning. Upstairs still smelled faintly of cedar from the linen closet and the sachets Elaine used to tuck between sheets, no matter how much I teased her for it. I paused outside our bedroom door. My bedroom now, though I had never found that phrase natural in my own head. The door was half open. Inside the room had that held breath it always had in the mornings. Our room faced east, and the light came in across the bed first, then along the vanity, then slowly reached the rocker in the corner by the window. Elaine used to say the room woke up politely. I had left almost everything where it had been, because moving things had felt at first like betrayal and then later like vandalism against a quiet I depended on. The bed was made. Caroline often made it if I was downstairs before her. She said it set a tone for the day. I appreciated the help. I did. But sometimes I missed the slack little imperfection Elaine always left at the lower right corner, no matter how tightly she tucked the rest. I set the mirror back on the vanity. Only then did I see the chair. It was the small upholstered slipper chair Elaine used when she sat to put on lotion at night or to sort earrings from the little porcelain dish by the mirror. It had always sat angled toward the window. Now it was turned toward the room, as if someone had wanted to sit in it and face the bed. I stood there looking at it longer than I should have. I could not have said exactly why it bothered me. Chairs get moved. A child wanders in. Somebody vacuums. Somebody sits down, but that chair had lived in that corner for 18 years, and there were grooves in the rug to prove it. It faced the room now with a slight deliberate neatness that made my skin tighten. I crossed over and nudged it back toward the window with my knee. The rug gave a little under the legs. The groove welcomed it home. My hand was still on the chair back when memory caught me by the throat. Elaine, 3 months before she died, standing at the vanity in that pale blue robe she wore thin at the cuffs. One hand braced against the table, the other turning the mirror so it caught the morning and not the bed. She had been weaker by then. You could see it in the pause between motions, in the way she pretended not to breathe hard if I entered the room too quickly. I had said, "Leave it, honey, I'll do it," and she had smiled without looking at me. "No," she said, "a room should never teach a person to vanish in it." At the time I had thought it was one of her odd little lines, half about housekeeping and half about dignity. The sort of thing she said that made sense if you knew her and sounded airy if you didn't. I had kissed the top of her head and gone downstairs to make tea. Standing there now with my hand on the chair, I felt that sentence change inside me. A room should never teach a person to vanish in it. I did not know yet what it meant, not really. But it no longer sounded airy. "Nora." "I mean it," Caroline called from downstairs. "Shoes and coat." I left the bedroom and came back down. The house always narrowed a little around school time. It was not an unpleasant narrowing, just the ordinary compression of people needing things at once. Lunchbox permission slip clean tights. Where was the purple crayon box? No, not that one, the other one. If you have lived long enough in family houses, you stop hearing certain frictions as noise. They are proof of life. After Elaine died, silence had been so total in those rooms for almost a year that when Caroline and Nora came, even their disorder had felt like rescue. Nora was at the kitchen table eating the last bites of toast with jelly, one sock on one bare foot hooked under her chair. She was a narrow little thing, all elbows and watchful eyes, with Caroline's dark hair and a seriousness that sat oddly on such a small face. She looked up when I came in and smiled, but only with her mouth. Her eyes dropped at once to the table. "You're going to miss the bus at this rate," I said. She took another bite. "Dad, sit," Caroline said. "I'll get your coffee. You already did enough this morning. It's coffee, not open-heart surgery." She said it absently while rinsing a container at the sink. Again, nothing to quarrel with. Still, I crossed to the pot and poured my own. I noticed because I had begun somehow to notice that she watched me do it in the reflection over the sink. The breakfast room and kitchen had once been Elaine's domain in the most ordinary marital sense, not because she believed women belonged there, but because she liked mornings and I liked evenings, and a decent marriage becomes a map of habits before it becomes a philosophy. Elaine had painted the breakfast room walls a pale yellow the year Caroline turned 10. The wood trim still carried tiny nicks from school chair collisions. Christmas tree drags one bad Thanksgiving when my brother-in-law clipped the corner with a turkey pan. In the right weather, the room smelled faintly of toast and old varnish. The radiator by the window knocked when it got too much steam. I knew that room the way a man knows the line of his own driveway. And yet, with the lunch containers drying by the sink and the bright plastic bottle of children's vitamins beside the fruit bowl and the little stack of Caroline's unopened mail held with a binder clip by the bread box, I sometimes felt less like its keeper than like someone who had stayed on in a house after the job of living there had been reassigned. Nora slid off her chair and came around the table. "Can I bring chalk after school if it's not raining?" Caroline said. "It's not supposed to." "We'll see." Nora looked at me. "Grandpa, far as I'm concerned, chalk isn't a federal matter." That got a small, real smile out of her. Caroline gave me one of her looks over the rim of her mug, not irritated exactly, but measuring whether I had made life easier or harder. Then the doorbell rang. It was not a loud bell. Elaine had picked it out because she hated harsh chimes. A clear two-note sound, almost modest. Still, in that moment, it cut the house cleanly in two. Nora froze. Not in a childish, startled way. Not a jump, not a flinch. She went still all at once, like something inside her had stepped on a brake. Her hand tightened on the back of my chair. Caroline set her mug down. "I'll get it," I said, already turning. "Dad." I was halfway through the breakfast room when Nora's fingers caught the sleeve of my robe. I looked down. Her face had gone pale in a way that made her freckles stand out sharp across the bridge of her nose. She leaned close enough that her hair brushed my arm and whispered, "Don't answer that door." I stared at her. Children whisper in all kinds of ways. For play, for secrets, for drama. This was none of those. There was no thrill in it, no mischief. She whispered like someone repeating a rule that mattered, what I said. Behind me, Caroline was already moving. "Nora, go get your shoes." Nora glanced over her shoulder toward the kitchen, before she looked back at me, and the glance was worse than the whisper. It was quick and practiced the look of a child checking weather. "Don't," she whispered again. The bell rang a second time. I straightened. "Tom," Caroline said. It had been years since she called me Tom. The sound of it in her voice was so rare, I felt it more than heard it. I turned my head. She was standing at the threshold between kitchen and hall now, not hurrying, not alarmed, but placed. One hand still on the mug, one flat against the trim. There was a composure in her face I could not read fast enough. Not fear, not surprise. Something like irritation disciplined into calm. "Who is it?" I asked. "I don't know," she said too quickly. Then, "Probably Marjorie." "Marjorie who?" "I'll handle it." There was nothing outwardly strange in those 3 words. A daughter managing a school morning. A father in a robe. A stranger at the door. I knew all the practical reasons she might prefer to answer it herself, but the house had already shifted under me once that morning, maybe twice, and I was suddenly tired of people handling things in my house before I had even seen them. I took Nora's hand off my sleeve gently and walked toward the front door. Caroline moved too. Not enough to block me, not in any way a witness could call rude, but enough that the hall seemed narrower. I had the oddest sensation that I was not simply going to my own front door, but approaching a checkpoint inside some more organized place. The front hall smelled of cold air around the old wood and the faint citrus cleaner from the console table. The mirror was gone. In the minute or 2 since I had brought it upstairs, the rectangle of clear wood where it had sat looked almost indecently bare. The bell did not ring again. Whoever was out there had patience. I reached for the knob. "Dad." "Wait," Caroline said, her voice low now. "Please." I turned and looked at her fully. It was not what she said. It was her face. Flat, controlled, almost professional. She was not startled. She was managing variables. That thought came, and I hated it for existing, hated myself for thinking of my daughter that way. I opened the door. Cold March air came in first, smelling of wet pavement and thawed earth. Then the woman on the porch lifted her chin. I do not mean she resembled Elaine in some vague, sentimental way. Not the loose language people use when grief is involved. I mean there was enough of Elaine there in the set of the mouth, in the careful way the hair had been pinned back from one temple in the cardigan color in the manner of standing slightly turned, as if making space for someone beside her, that my body reacted before my mind did. My hand tightened on the knob. My chest clenched so hard I had to catch the edge of the door with my other hand. It was not my wife. No sane man could have held that confusion long. The face was broader, the skin rougher, the eyes smaller, and too restless. Elaine had never looked at a doorway like she meant both to enter and to flee. But the likeness hit with the force of a blow because it had not happened by accident. It was assembled. Behind me I heard Caroline make a small sound between her teeth. The woman on the porch saw my reaction and looked ashamed all at once. "Mr. Weller," she said. Her voice was wrong too thin, apologetic, but the sight of that cardigan over those narrow shoulders made something sick whiz in my throat. It was not the same cardigan. Elaine's had been softer with mother-of-pearl buttons. This one was cheaper and the color slightly darker, but it was close enough to make me feel as though someone had reached into a drawer. Upstairs and put on one of our years. "Do I know you?" I asked. "Tom," Caroline said sharply, and then softened it in the same breath. "Go back to the kitchen, please." The woman's eyes flicked past me toward Caroline, and whatever I had seen in my daughter's face a second earlier settled into certainty. The woman was not surprised to see her there. She was bracing for her. "No," I said, still staring at the porch. I asked her something. The woman swallowed. Up close I could see she wore a line of pale lipstick, too dry for her mouth, and a scarf tied under her coat collar the way Elaine used to tie hers when the wind was high. Too many details, too many choices. My skin prickled. "My name is Marjorie Pell," she said. "I'm sorry to come this way. I told her I didn't want to, but—" "That's enough," Caroline said. Not loudly, if anything more softly than before, but there was steel in it now. The woman flinched as if struck. I turned my head. "You know her?" Caroline had gone pale around the mouth. "She's someone I used to know. She's not well." Marjorie shook her head immediately. "That's not Marjorie." Caroline said, "Leave." Nora had come into the hall behind us. I did not hear her at first. I only felt the small presence the way adults do when a child enters a room that has changed temperature. I looked back and saw her halfway between the breakfast room and the stairs, one hand twisted in the hem of her shirt, eyes fixed on the porch. "Go back to the kitchen," Caroline said over her shoulder. Nora did not move. Marjorie saw the child, and for one instant the shame in her face deepened into something like grief. "I didn't mean for her to be here," she said. "What did you mean?" I asked. Caroline stepped closer to the door. "Not enough to shove it, just enough to tighten the opening around me and the woman outside. Dad, this is ridiculous. She's upset. She needs to go." Marjorie's gaze came back to me. "I needed to tell you." "Leave," Caroline said. There was a terrible quiet then. Not in the street. Somewhere a truck went by. Water dripped from the gutter onto the concrete edge of the porch, but inside the hall all I could hear was Nora breathing. Marjorie looked at Caroline, then at me. Her fingers went to the hollow of her throat. "I shouldn't have come dressed like this," she said in a rush, and it landed so hard in the silence that nobody spoke for a second. "I know that. I know how it looks. I just thought maybe if he saw me before she—" Caroline moved then quicker than I had seen her move all morning. She stepped between me and the opening enough that the doorway became hers. "Get off my porch," she said. Not loud, not wild. That was what made it ugly. It was the voice of someone reclaiming procedure. Marjorie took a step back. "You said he'd never listen unless go." I put my hand on the door edge to widen it again. Caroline turned to me immediately, her whole face rearranged into strain and concern so fast it made me dizzy. "She's been bothering me for weeks," she said. "I didn't want to upset you. She's had some issues," and she latched onto what I asked. "Mom, the family." "I don't know." Marjorie laughed, once a small broken sound. "That's not what happened. You need to leave," Caroline repeated. Nora made a tiny noise then. Not a word, just a sound of distress pressed into the back of her throat. I looked at her. She was staring at Marjorie as though she had seen a picture step out of a frame. "Have you seen her before?" I asked. Nora's eyes jumped to Caroline's face. That was the answer before any answer came. Caroline turned sharply. "Nora, upstairs." Nora did not move. "Now." I looked from one to the other. Caroline. Dad not in front of her. Marjorie backed down one step of the porch. "I'm sorry," she said to me. And there were tears in her eyes now, but not clean ones, not simple ones. I didn't know how else to get past her. Past her. I felt something shift then, not outside but inside the house behind me. The front hall, the staircase, the breakfast room with the jelly knife still on Nora's plate, the narrow console table, the coat hooks by the door, all of it seemed for one unsteady beat, arranged around the fact that there were apparently ways one had to get past my daughter in order to reach me. "Get in your car," Caroline said to Marjorie. Marjorie looked at me one last time. "You need to ask her why she said I couldn't come in." Before I could answer, Caroline swung the door, not slammed. She did not slam. She closed it firmly with the controlled finality of a woman ending an exchange she had already classified as dangerous nonsense. The latch clicked. For a moment, none of us moved. Caroline kept her hand on the knob and leaned her forehead down once as though gathering herself. When she turned back, her eyes were bright but dry. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have handled that before it got to this." I looked at the closed door, then at her. "Who is she, I told you? Someone I used to know. How does she know your mother's clothes? She doesn't. She's dressed like her." "That is in your head," Caroline said, and then seeing my face corrected instantly. "I mean, you're upset. Of course you'd connect things." There it was again. Not exactly correction. Not even dismissal, something gentler and more invasive. A hand laid on the meaning before I could quite claim it for myself. I said Nora asked me not to answer the door. Caroline's jaw tightened. Because I told her there was a strange lady outside and not to go near the door if the bell rang. That sounded reasonable, almost enough to satisfy me. Almost enough. I turned to Nora. "Honey, is that what happened?" Nora looked at her mother, then at me, then down at her own shirt, twisted in her fists. "Upstairs," Caroline said. Nora went. Small feet on the runner, 1, 2, 3, the third step creaking near the top. She did not run. She moved like a child, obeying something already familiar. When she was gone, I said, "You've seen that woman before." Caroline exhaled through her nose. "Dad, please. I have to get Nora out the door, and I do not have time for a whole interrogation over Marjorie Pell. Then answer one question. She's unstable." "That's not what I asked." Caroline rubbed her temple. "I used to know her through a mutual friend. She helped once or twice when Mom was sick, dropping things off, sitting with her for an hour if I had to run an errand. After that, she got attached. She started calling, showing up. She says strange things. I cut off contact. You never mentioned her. Because why would I? There was an answer to that. A clear one. Because a woman had just arrived at my front door looking enough like my dead wife to stop my heart. Because my granddaughter had warned me not to open the door. Because my own house had felt in that brief exchange less like a home than a place with permissions. But the years had taught me a dangerous habit. When family conflict approaches full shape, I tend to reach for the version of events that allows everybody to keep going through the day. Caroline saw that impulse in me the way other people see a gate swing open. She softened. "Dad, I was trying to spare you this. That's all. She's troubled and she's fixated, and now she's dragged Nora into it. I'll deal with her." There it was again. I'll deal with her. I looked past Caroline into the kitchen. Nora's lunch bag sat zipped on the counter. Her coat was draped over the chair. The cereal bowl still held a stripe of milk at the bottom where she hadn't finished. All the ordinary little remains of a school morning were exactly where they should have been. Yet the house did not feel ordinary. It felt managed. That was the word that kept returning. Not safe, not calm. Managed. "I don't want you using that bedroom for storage or dress-up or whatever this is," I said. Caroline blinked. "What, your mother's room?" She stared at me a moment too long. "Nobody is using Mom's room for dress-up." The chair was turned. "What chair?" "In the bedroom. I made your bed this morning, Dad. I sat in the chair to take off a sock Nora had left on it. That's probably the giant conspiracy." Her tone was dry now, but still controlled. Still just inside the line of respect. If I pushed harder, I would be the one making a scene. The bus brakes sighed outside at the curb. Caroline moved instantly back into motion. Nora, bus. The spell broke because the timetable demanded it. That too felt wrong somehow, that life could resume so quickly. Nora came down with her coat half on and her backpack dragging from one shoulder. Caroline bent to zip the coat, smooth the hair past the lunch, all in one practiced sequence. Nora said goodbye to me and kissed my cheek. Her face was cool from the stairwell. "Have a good day," I told her. She nodded, then hesitated. "What is it?" I said softly. Her eyes slid toward the front door. Nothing, she whispered. Caroline took her hand. "We're late." I followed them into the hall. Caroline opened the door, looked out first, and only then let Nora step onto the porch. That was another thing I noticed. When they reached the walk, Nora looked back at me once. Not smiling, not frightened exactly. Measuring. Then they were gone down the driveway to the bus, and I was standing alone in the hall with the door half open and cold air moving around my ankles. The street looked normal enough. Damp pavement, maple branches still bare. A recycling bin tipped on its side 2 houses down. No sign of Marjorie Pell. If she had come in a car, it was gone. If she had come on foot, she had disappeared quickly for a woman who had seemed so shaky on the porch. I closed the door and locked it. That was not something I usually did in daylight. The house settled around me in that old home way, a light tick in the radiator, a faint pop in the dining room floor. The refrigerator motor cutting off, but none of it felt companionable. I stood in the center of the hall and looked at the console table where the mirror had been, and then at the stairs leading up to the bedroom where I had put it back. A woman with my dead wife's face had stood on my porch, and my daughter had not looked surprised. My granddaughter had known enough to warn me before the second ring of the bell. There was an explanation for all of it, I told myself. There had to be. Some sad little chain of modern trouble. A fragile woman, old caregiving entanglements. Caroline trying to manage a nuisance without upsetting me. Houses change when more people live in them. Old objects travel. Children pick up adult anxiety and make it strange. Everything I had seen so far could still be arranged into something ugly but ordinary. I went into the kitchen and rinsed out my coffee cup, though there was still half a cup left in it. On the counter beside the sink sat Nora's school folder, forgotten in the rush. Purple plastic one corner chewed where she had worried it with her teeth. I picked it up and laid it by Caroline's planner so she would see it when she came home. Her planner was closed, dark leather edges worn pale. Beside it lay a pharmacy receipt folded in thirds and tucked under a pen. I did not mean to look at it. I only saw my name on the exposed strip when I turned the folder. Thomas Weller. Below that smaller print, refill pickup delegated. I unfolded it. Blood pressure medication. Refilled yesterday at 4:12 p.m. Picked up. I had not picked it up. That by itself might not have meant much. Caroline often ran errands. She had picked up prescriptions before. But I had not known I needed a refill, and the thing that made my stomach go cold was not the receipt itself. It was that it sat beneath her pen on the counter like part of a system already finished, one small proof of how the house now handled me, whether I knew it or not. I stood there holding the slip and listening to the empty rooms. Then from upstairs, very faintly, I heard the scrape of a chair leg against wood. I froze. The sound came again, brief and dry, from the direction of our bedroom. There was nobody else in the house. I set the receipt down and went to the stairs. By the time I reached the landing, the house was silent. The bedroom door stood half open the way I had left it. The bed was smooth. The curtains stirred a little from the cracked window, and in the corner by the vanity, the slipper chair I had turned back toward the window was facing the room again. I do not know how long I stood there. Not because I thought there was a ghost in the house. I am too old for that and too tired for theatrics. I stood there because I knew with a clarity that made me feel briefly sick that a chair does not turn itself, and I had been downstairs in the hall when it moved. I took one step into the room. On the vanity beside Elaine's silver mirror lay a little pale smear at the edge of the glass, the dry, chalky color of lipstick she used to wear when she dressed for church in winter. Elaine had been dead 3 years. And downstairs in the front hall of my house, my granddaughter had whispered, as if she already knew there were people who were not supposed to come inside. I went to the chair first. There are moments when a man does something foolish because the alternative would require him to name what he knows. I put my hands on the worn fabric arms and looked down at the rug as if the pile itself might tell me whether I had mistaken the chair's position the first time. The legs sat just outside the old indentations. Not far, less than an inch maybe, but enough. Enough that I could see the marks where it had belonged all those years facing the window, and the washed-out place in the nap where morning light used to lie across the seat. The lipstick smear on the mirror troubled me more. It was not bright, not theatrical. It was the sort of faded powdery rose Elaine wore to church or to Christmas Eve supper at my sister's, a practical color a woman could apply without needing another mirror to fix it. It had dried along the lower edge of the glass in a thumb-width arc, as if somebody had leaned in too close, then caught herself. I stood there in our bedroom and became aware of my own breathing. The room smelled faintly of sachet and cold air from the cracked window. Somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator kicked back on. A truck hit the manhole cover at the corner and rattled the front glass a little. Every sound belonged to the ordinary life of the house. That was what made the wrongness so bad. It had not burst through the walls. It had settled itself on top of the ordinary. I took out my handkerchief and rubbed at the lipstick. It came off with one slow drag of pink-beige powder. The handkerchief in my hand suddenly looked indecent, as if I had wiped a mouth I did not know. I folded the soiled corner inward and laid the cloth on the vanity. Then I turned the mirror toward the window again, because that was how Elaine kept it, and stood there longer than was sensible. I told myself 3 things in order. First, that Caroline must have been upstairs, after all, quick and silent, doing one of the 1,000 little things women with children do between one demand and the next. Second, that the lipstick had likely been left there longer than I realized, and the morning had sharpened my mind against it only because of what had happened at the front door. Third, that if I kept feeding my own nerves, I would become exactly what I feared an old man made theatrical by grief and inconvenience. Those were reasonable thoughts. I could hear the reason in them as clearly as if another man had spoken them in the room with me. What I could not do was make them quiet the cold little place under my ribs. I left the bedroom, but I did not go back downstairs right away. I stood on the landing and listened to the house. The upstairs hall had always carried sound in a particular way. When Caroline was a teenager, you could tell by the rhythm on the stairs whether she was late for school or sneaking back in after curfew. Elaine could tell by the way a drawer shut whether one of us was irritated. Houses talk if you learn the grammar, she used to say. Another of those lines I had filed away under Elaine being Elaine. Now I listened hard enough to hear old nails settling under paint. Nothing moved. At the end of the hall, the linen closet stood open half an inch. I knew I had closed it yesterday after getting a clean pillowcase. I crossed and opened it fully. Towels on the left, fitted sheets on the upper shelf, extra blankets in the cedar chest at the bottom. Everything looked in place. But there, wedged between the stack of guest towels and an old heating pad, was Elaine's blue cardigan. Not the cardigan from the porch, Elaine's actual one. The mother-of-pearl buttons caught the hallway light in tiny flat moons. I took it down. The wool still held a ghost of her fabric softener if I held it near my face. I did, which was maybe a pathetic thing for a grown man to do, but grief makes private beggars of most of us. The left cuff was more worn than the right, because she always hooked that hand through purse straps and grocery sacks. There was a snag near the hem from a Christmas tree stand, 3 years before she got sick. I had not seen the cardigan since the previous winter. I thought it was in the cedar chest with the things I could not yet sort. Why was it in the linen closet? The answer arrived too easily because Caroline had put it there after pulling out spare towels or blankets or some other practical errand and simply not put it back. Every answer arrived too easily now. That was becoming its own kind of trouble. When a house gives you a dozen harmless explanations for one bad feeling, you start to suspect the house itself has joined the argument. I carried the cardigan downstairs and draped it over the banister while I finished dressing. After that, I returned to the kitchen and made myself a second cup of coffee, though the first one had gone cold on the counter. I stood at the sink and drank it too fast. The coffee tasted burned. Outside, the morning had turned brighter and meaner late winter sun glaring off damp pavement. The kitchen windows over the sink reflected the room strongly enough now that when I looked at the yard, I could also see my own outline, Caroline's planner on the counter, Nora's forgotten folder, the receipt beside it. I picked up the receipt again and read it more slowly. My name. The medication. Yesterday's time. Pickup completed. At the bottom, in tiny print I had not noticed before, authorized caregiver contact verified. That was enough to make me set the slip down and go to the kitchen desk nook. Nook was too mild a word for what that corner had become. When Elaine and I bought the house in 1989, it was just a little built-in writing shelf by the back door with one shallow drawer, and a corkboard above it where she kept recipe cards clipped beside the phone numbers of plumbers, school nurses, and my mother's bridge club friends. The phone sat there on a little crocheted pad. Bills got paid there. Permission slips got signed there. Once in a while, one of us wrote a check or jotted down a grocery item we had remembered too late. That was all. Now it looked like the administrative lung of the house. A dry erase family calendar hung above the desk. Caroline's handwriting covered most of it in neat blue capitals. Busy Wednesday, across one square. Dentist Nora in another. Grocery run. Library books. Bill due. There were color-coded sticky notes along one side, a narrow file box on the floor, a charging station with 2 phones and a tablet cord, a plastic caddy with scissors, cough drops, children's ibuprofen pens, spare battery stamps, and a thermometer. Beneath the desk sat a milk crate stuffed with school forms and utility envelopes. My old brass letter opener had been moved from the front hall drawer to the pencil cup. There was a kind of calm violence in the arrangement, not because it was messy, but because it was efficient in a way that presumed one person ought to see everything first. I opened the drawer. Inside were checkbooks, return address labels, paper clips, notepads, and a stack of appointment reminder cards held together with a binder clip. The top one had my name on it. Cardiology follow-up. March 3rd. 10:20 a.m. Across the front in Caroline's handwriting was written, "Reskid. Call back after school." The date on the corner told me the card had arrived 6 days earlier. I sat down hard on the little desk chair before I had decided to. The room around me went very still. I looked at the date again. March 3rd. That was last Thursday. On Thursday, I had gone to lunch with Daniel Mercer at O'Rourke's, and then spent the afternoon putting seed catalogs into a drawer, because looking at them out on the counter had begun to feel like mockery. I had not been to any cardiologist appointment. I had not even known there was one. There were 3 more cards beneath it. Physical therapy. Eye exam reminder. Insurance statement notice with a phone number circled. Each had some small sign of handling an underline, a check mark, a sticky tab. None had been put in front of me. Dad. I looked up so fast, I banged my knee under the desk. Caroline stood in the mudroom doorway with 2 grocery sacks hooked over one arm and her car keys in the other hand. She took in the open drawer, the cards in my hand, and the sight of me sitting at the nook as if I had broken into a locked office. There was a pause. Barely half a second. Long enough. "I forgot Nora's folder," she said. "It's on the counter." She set the grocery sacks down. "What are you doing?" I held up the cardiology card. "When were you planning to mention this?" Her face did not change much, but the composure in it tightened. "Mention? What?" "That I apparently had a cardiology appointment last week." She came into the kitchen, took the folder from the counter, and glanced at the card as if I were showing her a receipt for dry cleaning. "You told me not to schedule mornings without checking with you because you were tired after the bad weather. That is not the same thing as not telling me I had an appointment." "You did know about it. We talked about it at breakfast one day." "We did not." "We did." She slid the folder into Nora's backpack and zipped it. "You said you wanted to push it because you'd already had 2 appointments that week." I stared at her. She gave a little exhale of patience. "Dad, this is exactly why I handle the calendar. You get upset and then can't remember the conversation that got us there." The sentence did not land like accusation. That was the terrible skill of it. It landed like management. "I do not remember that conversation," I said. "Then maybe trust that I do. There are ways to wound a man without ever raising your voice. The wound comes from how much of himself he has to defend in order to object. My first feeling was not anger. It was shame. Shame that I might have forgotten. Shame that I might be making myself ridiculous over a scheduling issue. Shame that a woman outside in the wrong cardigan and a smear of lipstick on a mirror could have unsteadied me enough to pick a fight over note cards. Caroline watched all of that pass through me. I saw her see it. Then she changed tone. Softer. "You've had a hard few days. You didn't sleep much after Sunday church, and this morning was bizarre. Let me get Nora to school. We can go over the calendar tonight." The way she said "we can go over the calendar tonight" told me without words that the calendar was hers. A document I might be briefed on. A surface to be interpreted for me. I could hear how foolish that sounded even inside my own head. Families do this sort of thing all the time. One person becomes the organizer. One person keeps the lists. The other one forgets what day the dentist is. This is not tyranny. It is domestic life. Yet the card was in my hand, and my own appointment had passed through the house without reaching me. "When did the pharmacy make you my caregiver contact?" I asked. Her eyes flicked once toward the receipt I had left by the sink. A quick look, another answer before any answer. "I'm not your caregiver," she said. "It's just a contact designation, authorized caregiver contact verified. They use language like that for everyone. It doesn't mean anything." "Why didn't you tell me?" Her mouth pressed thin. "Because there was nothing to tell. They asked who should pick up if you weren't feeling well. I said me. End of story." I stood still holding the cards. "Without asking me." She straightened too, folder forgotten now. "You want to be consulted on every errand, fine. We can do that. But don't act like I'm staging a coup because I picked up your blood pressure medication." There it was again. The slight enlargement of my concern until it looked absurd. I put the appointment cards back in the drawer, with more force than I intended. That's not what I said. "No, but it's where this is going." She picked up Nora's backpack, looped it over her shoulder, and took her keys. Then she looked at me more carefully. Something in my face must have troubled her, because her own softened, though not in surrender. "Dad," she said, "are you sure you're not letting this morning get into your head?" Marjorie knew exactly what she was doing by showing up like that. There was a move in that sentence. A redirect back to spectacle. Back to the grotesque thing on the porch, as if the strangest thing that had happened today was a woman dressed to resemble Elaine, and not that my own life seemed to be passing through paperwork I had never seen. "You said she helped when your mother was sick. A few times. Did she come into the bedroom?" Caroline's stare sharpened. "What did she come upstairs? Maybe once to carry a laundry basket. I have no idea." She shifted the backpack higher. Why, I heard how raw my own voice sounded before I could smooth it. Because the chair was turned. For the first time since she entered the kitchen, Caroline looked at me not as someone annoyed or managerial or patiently burdened. She looked at me with something nearer pity. "Oh, Dad," she said, "nothing has ever made me angrier faster than pity given too early. What does that mean?" "It means you are worked up. It means Mom's room makes you emotional. It means Marjorie showing up dressed like a bad memory got to you, which is understandable, but you are now connecting things that don't connect." She stepped closer, then slow enough not to startle. "Take a breath. Please. I'm not saying you're wrong about feeling unsettled. I'm saying maybe this isn't the day to go digging through drawers and working yourself into a state." I looked at her hand on the backpack strap, at the little silver watch on her wrist, at the practical flats she wore because she was always moving. I tried to hear only concern. I could almost manage it if I focused hard enough, but beneath it, like a current under flat water, was something else. Not fear. Not guilt. Control of tempo. Control of tone. Control of what this moment would be allowed to mean. She touched my sleeve lightly. "Please don't make yourself sick over this." Then she took the backpack and left. The back door closed. Her car started in the drive. Gravel crackled under the tires. The sound diminished and was gone. I stood in the kitchen with the caddy of pens and thermometers in front of me, and felt suddenly like a man standing in somebody else's office after hours. I should say here that I did not leap to wild conclusions that day. I did not call a lawyer or the police or old friends with a taste for gossip. I made a sandwich at noon and left half of it on the plate. I took a walk around the block because motion has always helped me think, and because a man can judge the condition of his own mind by how his neighborhood looks to him. If the sidewalks start appearing like evidence, you're in trouble. The sidewalks looked like sidewalks. Mrs. Kessler's daffodils had pushed up yellow at the edge of the porch. The Carsons' Labrador barked at me through the fence and then remembered me halfway through. Two boys from the middle school biked by too fast and nearly clipped a mailbox. Ordinary. The world was not altered. Only my house was. When I came back, Daniel Mercer was standing on my porch. Daniel had lived 3 houses down for almost 15 years and had the sort of face that made children and insurance agents trust him. Broad forehead, thinning sandy hair, wire-rimmed glasses that he pushed up with one finger when he was thinking shoulders still straight from decades of standing in front of classrooms. He had been principal of the middle school until retirement and had retained that principal's gift of making his presence feel like order without ever becoming pompous about it. He held a paper bag from O'Rourke's in one hand. "Turkey on rye," he said. "I was getting one anyway." "That's not true," I said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." I let him in. The front hall felt different with another adult in it. More honest, maybe. Or maybe I simply wanted witness. Daniel set the paper bag on the console table and glanced once toward the stairs. "You all right?" he asked. That, too, can be a dangerous question. Men of my age have spent lifetimes saying fine when one would not survive cross-examination. I considered giving him the usual version. "Strange morning. Caroline had some visitor trouble. I'm tired. Nothing to dwell on. But something in me, worn thin maybe, had begun to resent my own discretion." "A woman came to the door looking like Elaine," I said. Daniel took off his glasses. He folded them in one hand and looked at me very quietly. "Well," he said after a moment, "that's not a sentence I was expecting before lunch." "No." He set the glasses on the console table, glanced at the paper bag, then back at me. "Tell me." So I did. Not all of it. I did not mention the lipstick smear at first or the cardigan in the linen closet. Those felt too intimate and somehow too easy to make absurd in the retelling. But I told him about the woman on the porch, about Nora whispering not to answer the door, about Caroline's reaction, about the appointment card, and the pharmacy receipt. Daniel listened without interrupting, one hand in his coat pocket, face giving away almost nothing. When I finished, he looked toward the kitchen. "Can I ask you something delicate?" he said. "You can try. How often do people get through to you directly these days?" I frowned. "Meaning?" He put his glasses back on. "Meaning I've come by twice in the last month when your car was here, and I saw movement in the kitchen, and both times Caroline stepped out onto the porch before I was halfway up the walk and said you were resting." I said nothing. "She wasn't rude," he added. "That's the thing. If she'd been rude, I'd have had a cleaner time of it in my own head. She was very reasonable. Said you'd had a rough night one time. Said you'd just fallen asleep in the chair the other. I told myself she was protecting your peace. I was home. Yes." I felt the blood move in my face. Daniel saw it and kept his voice level. "I'm not making accusations, Tom. I'm telling you something because after what you just said, it no longer feels like trivia." I looked past him toward the breakfast room where the late light always hit the table around 3 in the afternoon. Elaine had once told me Daniel was one of the few men she knew who understood how much cruelty could hide inside politeness. I had laughed then and asked if she meant him or the world. The world, she said. Daniel just knows where it lives. "What did she say exactly?" I asked. The first time, he thought. "That you were finally getting real rest, and she hated to wake you." He gave a small one-shouldered shrug. Perfectly normal. The second time she said, "I'll handle him," then corrected herself and said she'd make sure you called me. The sentence sat between us. I heard it the way I imagine I might have heard a splinter slide under skin if such a thing made noise. Not because it was dramatic, because of how ordinary it sounded in the wrong mouth. "Maybe she meant she'd remind me," I said. Maybe. Maybe I was asleep. Maybe. He was kind enough not to press. That kindness cost me something too. If he had looked skeptical, I could have defended Caroline and comforted myself at once. But Daniel, being Daniel, left the shape of the thing intact. We ate our sandwiches in the breakfast room because neither of us had the appetite to carry lunch into the kitchen desk nook as though the place were innocent. Outside, the sun flashed on standing water in the curb. The radiator knocked once and stopped. Daniel told me the city was finally resurfacing Preston Avenue in April. I told him that if they tore up the intersection again, the whole block would come down with pitchforks. We spoke of these things the way men do when truth has entered the room and everyone would like a minute before it sits down permanently. Then Daniel asked, "What was Marjorie Pell trying to tell you I put my sandwich down?" "I don't know." "You believe that I looked at the plate?" "I believe she meant to say something Caroline didn't want to said." "That's enough for one day." "Is it?" Daniel dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "For conclusions?" "Yes." "For paying attention?" "No." There was relief in hearing that from somebody else. Not because it let me be dramatic, but because it gave me a third thing between hysteria and denial. Pay attention. After he left, I went into the front parlor. We still called it the parlor because old names stick in old houses, though Elaine had mostly used it as a sitting room the last 10 years. 2 armchairs, a lamp with a pleated shade, the upright piano. No one played well enough to justify keeping, except on Christmas, the built-in shelves with family albums, and 3 dozen novels Elaine kept meaning to reread. It had been one of the quietest rooms in the house. A place for company, for the occasional phone call, for reading on winter afternoons when the front windows pulled in pale light and held it without fuss. Now it looked like a room pretending not to have changed. The chairs were still there. The piano still held the framed school photo of Caroline in her 8th grade choir dress and a brass bowl of spare change. But one corner by the front windows now contained 2 plastic storage bins with art supplies, a folding table stacked with library books and printer paper, and a little portable printer shoved halfway under the sideboard. Caroline called it the family room sometimes, though nobody sat there as a family. Nora did homework at the folding table. Caroline sorted forms, and from that front window, if you stood at the right angle, you could see anyone coming up the walk before they reached the porch. I stood in the center of the room and looked at the sight line. Then I looked back toward the hall, then back to the window. A perfectly practical arrangement. A mother with a child. School papers, limited space, use the room you have. Every answer still came dressed in sense. On the sideboard lay a stack of unopened mail and 3 envelopes already slit. I recognized my electric bill by the return address. Opened. Beside it sat Nora's school directory packet and a church donation statement. Also opened. I do not know why that stung more sharply than the appointment card. Maybe because appointments can be justified as coordination. Mail is another matter. Mail belongs to a person in a way a calendar often no longer does. I checked the electric bill. Paid online. Paid online. Elaine always paid the electric bill by check until the year before she died. When she got sick enough that stairs and checkbooks and due dates began to feel like unnecessary labor, Caroline insisted on setting up autopay to simplify things. I remember the evening because Elaine did not want it. She stood at the sink in that same blue cardigan, tapping a dish towel against her palm, and said, "Automatic is convenient right up until no one remembers what was supposed to be theirs." Caroline had laughed and kissed her cheek and told her she was making philosophy out of utility service. I had sided with convenience. Standing in the parlor with the open bill in my hand, I remembered that night differently. Not because autopay itself was sinister, because the argument no longer sounded like one about electricity. By the time Caroline and Nora came home, I had done something I'm not proud of and not quite ashamed of either. I had gone through the kitchen nook drawer and made a small stack of every paper with my name on it. Appointment cards, pharmacy, slips and insurance explanation of benefits, a physical therapy reminder, 1 notice from the eye doctor, and a folded yellow sticky note that read, "Call Dad's office, back signed, forms in Caroline's handwriting." I had not read the insurance form fully. I could not make myself. The envelope window, the coded numbers, the air of business around my own body repelled me all at once. I simply added it to the stack and tucked the stack under the placemats in the dining room sideboard drawer. When Nora came through the door, she looked first at me, then at the hall table, then upstairs. "Hi, Grandpa. Hi, honey." She smelled like recessed dirt and paste and whatever artificial grape scent elementary school classrooms absorb into children by osmosis. Caroline came in behind her carrying grocery sacks and the portable printer from the parlor tucked under one arm. "Why's this in here?" I asked before I could stop myself. She followed my gaze to the printer. "Because Nora has a project. It was in the parlor." "Yes, it used to be a sitting room." "It still is," she said, setting the printer on the kitchen counter. "Sit in it any time you like." Her tone was light, but Nora had gone quiet already. The change in that child happened like weather going behind a cloud. 1 second present, the next withdrawn to the edges. I didn't say I needed permission. No one said you did. A man can hear himself being led in circles if he is honest enough. I let that one go. Nora slipped out of the room with her backpack and I heard her on the stairs. Caroline unpacked groceries. Apples, sandwich bread, canned tomatoes, yogurt tubes, the fabric softener Elaine had once refused to buy because she said it smelled like a department store, trying too hard. Now it lived in our laundry room because the kids like it, though. There was only one child in the house. "Was Daniel here?" she asked casually. "Yes. For lunch?" "He brought sandwiches." She nodded. "That was nice." "Nothing more?" But her hand paused over the loaf of bread before she put it in the box. "How nice of him," she said. "What does that mean?" "Nothing. He worries." "So do I. That's different." I waited, but she let that hang there as if the category was self-explanatory. Later, after homework and supper, and the usual bedtime orbit of bath towel, lost sock. One more story, one more sip of water. I found Nora on the stair landing with her chalk box open beside her. "You can't draw indoors," I said. She looked down, guilty for a second, then relieved when she saw it was me. I wasn't. There were 3 little pale blue lines on the top stair tread. Not pictures, marks. Then 3 more on the next one. "What are those?" She closed the chalk box halfway. "Nothing." I sat down on the stair above her, slow enough not to make the old wood complain too much. "Looks like something." She shrugged. "Is it a game?" Another shrug. The stairwell light threw shadows under her eyes. She looked older there than she did in the yard or at the breakfast table. Not older exactly. More careful. "Nora," I said quietly this morning. Her head came up fast. Her eyes went immediately to the hall below as if checking whether Caroline could hear. Then she climbed 2 steps toward me and whispered, "Don't tell Mom I told." I felt my own breath shorten. "I won't," I said. She came close enough that her hair brushed my sleeve. "Mom said if the lady came back, I had to get her before she rang twice." "Why?" "She said the lady tells lies." "What lies?" Nora twisted the hem of her shirt. "I don't know." "Have you seen her before?" A pause. Then the smallest nod. Here another nod, when Nora looked miserable. "I don't know when." That was a child's answer, but not a useless one. Children often know sequence by feeling instead of dates. I tried again. Was it daytime or nighttime, she thought. Dark outside. "Did she come in?" Nora's eyes shifted to the front hall below us. Mom said she wasn't supposed to. The words were almost exactly the ones I had feared. I kept my voice even. "Did you see her in the house?" Before Nora could answer, Caroline called from the kitchen. "Nora, teeth." The child pulled away from me as if a string had yanked her. "Nora, I'm coming." She scrambled up, chalk box clutched to her chest. "Nora," I said. She stopped 1 stair above me. Her face had closed. "What? What did your mother say she wasn't supposed to do?" Nora looked down at me for 1 long second that felt longer because it was full of decision. Then she whispered so low I nearly missed it. "Come inside." And then she ran to the bathroom. I stayed on the landing until the faucet came on, and Caroline began talking to her through the open door in that ordinary mother voice that might have been the safest sound in the world if I had not already heard too much through it. That night, I did something else I had not done since Elaine died. I called the pharmacy myself, not the automated line, Lydia Keene. Lydia had owned Keene Family Pharmacy for nearly 30 years and had the sort of exactness that made people trust her with their blood pressure and their secrets. She knew everybody's grandkids, but she never repeated what she knew to the wrong ears. When Elaine was sick, Lydia had once driven cough medication to the house herself after closing because she didn't like how Tomlin's drug on the highway had treated us on the phone. Elaine never forgot that. Lydia answered on the third ring. Keene Pharmacy. Lydia. It's Tom Weller. Her voice changed at once, warmer. Tom. You all right? I need to ask you something, and I'd prefer an honest answer to a soothing one. There was a pause. Paper rustled. That sounds like you. Go ahead. When did my daughter become my caregiver contact? Silence again, this time longer. Why are you asking me that tonight? Because my refill was picked up yesterday and I found out from the receipt. Another pause. Then Tom is Caroline there now. All right. Her chair creaked over the line. You've had contact designations on file for a long time. Elaine first, then Caroline, as alternate, during Elaine's treatment period. After Elaine died, Caroline remained listed because she was handling pickups for a while, and because, if I'm remembering correctly, she said it was easier on you. Did anyone ask me? Lydia exhaled. I can't answer that neatly. Some of it would have been discussed during pickup and refill calls. Some of it would have been carried over from earlier authorizations. It's not the same as declaring legal incapacity, if that's what you're afraid of. That wasn't my question. No, she said softly. It wasn't. I gripped the phone tighter, then answered the one I asked. Another rustle of paper. Tom, I'm going to be careful because this is my business and your health information. But since you are calling me directly, I can say this: over the last year, more and more of the conversation about your refills has come through Caroline. That hurt more than I expected. Not because it was scandalous, because hearing it from another adult made my own absence sound official. Lydia continued. She's always been polite. She never asked for anything outrageous, but yes, there were times I assumed she had already spoken with you and later wondered if maybe that assumption was doing too much work. I sat down on the edge of the bed. When did you wonder that? There was a little clink as if she had set her glasses down. The truth. The day your wife came in near the end and asked me very plain what protections exist to keep a spouse from being administratively sidelined in his own care. I could not speak. Lydia's voice gentled, but she did not soften the words. Elaine wasn't dramatic about it. She asked like a woman asking for facts. I told her there are limits to what family can do without formal paperwork, but there are also many ways information flow changes when one person becomes the default point of contact. She nodded. She said, yes, that's exactly what I mean. I stared at the dark window over the vanity. My own reflection hovered there above the dresser, pale and uncertain. What made her ask? That I said. I didn't ask. Lydia paused. I assumed she had reasons she preferred not to spell out. She was still herself then, Tom. Very much herself. I put my free hand over my eyes. In the silence that followed memory came not as picture first, but as irritation. Elaine at the kitchen sink sorting mail into 2 neat piles and moving one of Caroline's notepads aside with the back of her fingers. Caroline laughing and saying, Mom, it would save everyone time if we just routed all the appointment stuff through me for now. Elaine replying, for now has a way of getting permanent if you stop hearing it. Me from the table telling them both not to turn the kitchen into a courtroom. At the time I had thought I was the peacekeeper, Tom Lydia said. I'm here. I'm not telling you anyone's abusing anything. I am telling you your wife asked questions that suggested she was worried about exactly this kind of drift. Drift? Such a decent word for so indecent a feeling. She asked more than once, I said. No, once to me. Lydia hesitated. Twice, if you count the time she came back to pick up her own prescription and asked whether a husband can be moved to an alternate contact without understanding what's being done in his name. The room tilted. Not literally. I am not a fainting man, but something in the structure of the last 3 years shifted hard enough that I had to lower the phone from my ear for a second and breathe into my hand. Elaine had seen it. Not necessarily everything. Not the woman on the porch, not the chair turned in the room, not whatever ugly improvisation Caroline had built by now, but enough. Enough to ask, enough to wonder what could happen if for now became the architecture of the house. And I had not seen it. Worse, I had likely stood in the very kitchen where she tried to say it and mistaken her fear for fussiness, my daughter's pressure for practicality, myself for the reasonable one. Tom. Yes. Do you want me to print your current contact authorizations and refill notes? Lydia asked. You can pick them up tomorrow yourself. The word yourself nearly undid me. Yes, I said. Yes, I do. All right. And, Tom, what if something feels wrong in a family, it doesn't become imaginary? Just because nobody has yelled yet. After I hung up, I sat in the dark room, holding the dead receiver and listening to the house settle. Down the hall, Caroline moved softly in Nora's room. A drawer opening the rustle of pajamas, the practiced murmur of a bedtime sentence too low to make out. On any other night, that sound would have comforted me. It would have been proof that a house with women and children in it still possessed a center. Now it sounded like activity behind a wall in a house I had mistaken for quiet. I put the receiver back crossed to the vanity and turned on the lamp. The silver mirror caught the light and gave it back in a flatter, colder square. For 3 years I had believed the room remained Elaine's because I had left it mostly untouched. That had been my private nobility, or so I thought. I had preserved, I had respected, I had not rushed grief out of the furniture. Now in that hard little pool of lamplight, the truth arrived with a cruelty so plain it almost felt merciful. The room had not remained Elaine's because I preserved it. It had remained Elaine's only in the ways no one had yet bothered to take from me completely. And somewhere in the last year of her life, my wife had been asking professionals how to stop help from turning into control while I sat in the next room believing I was keeping the peace. I stood at Elaine's vanity until the lamp began to feel too bright for the room. The silver mirror held the light like something alert. Not alive. I am too old and too tired to turn a piece of household silver into a ghost story. But I could not look at it now without seeing not just Elaine's careful hands on the frame, not just the lipstick smear or the wrong angle or Marjorie Pell's assembled resemblance at the door. I saw something worse. I saw that for years I had mistaken the visible quiet of my house for moral safety. That is a humiliating thing for a man to learn in his own bedroom. I switched the lamp off and stood in the dark long enough for the room to turn back into shapes. The bed, the chair, the window, the dresser, the faint square of the mirror, pulling moonlight from the glass. Down the hall, Caroline crossed from Nora's room to her own, or what had once been Caroline's room and was now hers again. The floor gave its small familiar complaint under her weight. A few minutes later, the bathroom faucet ran, then stopped. A drawer closed, then quiet. I did not sleep much. Not because I was afraid someone would come into the room with a knife, or because I expected to hear whispering through the vents. The house remained itself in all the practical ways. The furnace kicked on. Pipes clicked once. A truck passed at 2:13. Rain began sometime after midnight and tapped the front windows lightly. No, what kept me awake was the knowledge that all the ordinary sounds of the house had become available to new interpretation. A person can live inside the same walls for decades and still overnight lose fluency in them. I got up at 5:30 and dressed before anyone else stirred. That alone felt like the first step in something. For too long I had been receiving my own mornings as though they had already been arranged for me. Coffee already started. The paper already brought in. The breakfast room blinds already half opened. It had felt kind, helpful, thoughtful. Standing in the kitchen in the dark with the coffee beans in my own hand, the grinder loud and rude in the silence, I realized how completely I had come to accept that help as the tone of my days. The grinder finished. I stood there with the grounds in my palm, smelling their bitterness, and understood that I would have to start doing certain things for myself, whether I strictly needed to or not. Not because making your own coffee is an act of rebellion, but because a house teaches you your place by repetition. Elaine had known that. That was what I had missed in all her tidy, precise, too easily dismissed sayings. Routine was not decoration to her. It was moral geography. By 6:15 the coffee was ready, the breakfast room was still dim, and I had a yellow legal pad open at the table. It had belonged to Daniel. He left it here 2 weeks earlier after helping me sort a leak estimate from the roofer, and I had not yet returned it. His blocky school administrator handwriting still filled the first page with phone numbers and measurements. I tore that one off carefully and began a new page. I wrote the date. Then I wrote in order every concrete thing I knew. Mirror downstairs on front hall console, smudges on glass, chair in bedroom turned towards room, lipstick on mirror, blue cardigan in linen closet, appointment card rescheduled without my knowledge, pharmacy receipt authorized, caregiver contact verified. Daniel turned away from the porch twice. Nora warned me not to answer door. Nora said Marjorie wasn't supposed to come inside. Lydia Elaine asked about help becoming control. I stared at the list after I finished it. A list can steady a man. It can also shame him. On the page, what had felt diffuse and humiliating became sequence. That was useful. But it also became undeniable. That I was now the sort of man sitting at his own breakfast table making notes about his daughter before sunrise because he no longer trusted the order of his house. There was movement upstairs at 6:38. The third stair from the top creaked, then another, then Nora's lighter tread. I slid the legal pad under the newspaper and poured myself more coffee just as Caroline came into the kitchen in her robe, hair loose, one hand at the back of Nora's neck, guiding her toward the stool. "You're up early," she said. "So are you." "I usually am." That was true enough. But I had often been the second consciousness in my own mornings. Not today. Caroline noticed the coffee already made and gave me a look I might once have called grateful. Now I could not read gratitude cleanly from her face. "Too many other things could borrow its clothes. I would have done that," she said. "I know." She stood for a second as though expecting something more. Then she crossed to the pantry and took out the cereal. Nora climbed onto the stool and tucked one foot under her nightgown hem. Her hair was frizzy from sleep. She looked at me once quickly, then at the bowl Caroline set down in front of her. I asked as evenly as I could, "How'd you sleep?" "Fine." "Any bad dreams?" She looked at Caroline before she answered. "No, that was it. That was all." But I watched the glance happen and felt something in me set harder. Caroline poured milk, pushed the bowl closer, and turned to the counter where the lunch boxes sat open. "I was thinking we should probably keep things simple today," she said. "No visitors, no surprises." I said nothing. She glanced over her shoulder. "That sound all right?" "No visitors. For whom?" "For all of us, Dad." Yesterday was upsetting. There's a difference between upsetting and prohibited. Her hand paused over the peanut butter jar. Then she resumed moving, unscrewing the lid, taking out the knife. Calm returning to her shoulders, as if it had only been briefly interrupted. "If this is about Marjorie again," she said, "I really don't know how much more clearly I can explain that she's manipulative. Manipulative, how she inserts herself. She uses emotion. She confuses things. How do you know her, I told you?" "No, you gave me a category and a warning." "That's not the same thing." Caroline spread peanut butter with fast, even strokes. "I knew her through one of the women from church support meals when Mom was sick. She helped a couple of times, then kept hovering." I stopped responding. Why was she dressed like Elaine? Caroline turned then, knife still in her hand, not threatening in any way, just annoyed in the practical manner of someone prevented from finishing breakfast. Maybe because she knew what would upset you. Maybe because she's disturbed. Maybe because resemblance plus grief plus your imagination does the rest. Pick one. Nora's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. I looked at the child, then back at Caroline. Not in front of her, I said. Then stop doing this in front of her. She said it softly. That was always the point. If she had barked or snapped, any fool could have seen the shape of the conflict. Softness fogged it. I stood. I'm going to the pharmacy. Caroline's face did not change at first. Then one small line appeared between her brows. For what? For my refill notes. Since apparently I have them, I can pick them up. No. She set the knife down with care. Dad, if this is because Lydia fed into your anxiety. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because the sentence had managed to insult both me and Lydia in 13 words. Fed into my anxiety. I'm saying pharmacists are not therapists, and they only see pieces. So do daughters. That landed. She went still. For one heartbeat, I saw something plain in her. Something close to contempt, or maybe only anger that had been denied room to breathe for too long. Then it was gone. Fine, she said. Go to the pharmacy. There was more danger in that calm acceptance than there would have been in a fight. It meant she was already adjusting her strategy. I took my coat from the hall closet. Elaine's blue cardigan still hung over the banister where I had left it the night before. Caroline saw me see it. I found that upstairs, she said immediately. I was going to put it in the cedar chest. In the linen closet. She gave me a look of blank, practical confusion. Was that where I left it? I did not answer. She did not repeat herself. She turned back to Nora's sandwich and cut the crusts off in 4 neat motions. At Keene Pharmacy, Lydia had the papers ready in a brown envelope with my name written on the front in her disciplined pharmacist script. She wore a rust-colored sweater and the reading glasses on the little black cord that always made her look like she might read your moral character if you stood still too long. I printed what I can ethically print, she said when I reached the counter. Contact notes, pickup logs, and the current authorization screen. Thank you. She studied my face. Did you sleep? Not enough. That makes 2 of us. I tried to smile. It did not take. She lowered her voice, though the pharmacy was nearly empty. Tom, none of this means you've been declared anything. Do you understand me? Yes. But it may mean assumptions have been allowed to solidify into process. I nodded. She slid the envelope toward me, but kept 2 fingers on it for a moment before letting go. Elaine came in alone the first time she asked those questions. The second time, Caroline was with her. Your wife waited until Caroline went to the bathroom before she said more. Something moved inside my chest. What did she say? Lydia looked down at the counter. When she looked up again, she had chosen her words carefully. She said, I know the difference between help and replacement. I'm trying to make sure he'll know it too. I could not speak. Lydia watched me bear that. She had always been good at that part, staying in the room with another person's pain without trying to tidy it before it finished happening. She loved you, Lydia said quietly. This wasn't about distrusting you. It was about knowing your nature. My nature, I repeated because it was easier than anything else. You don't like conflict. Elaine knew that. She also knew your instinct is to be grateful before you are careful. That was true enough to feel like insult, though Lydia had meant it kindly. I took the envelope and stepped aside to the little consultation alcove near the blood pressure machine. I opened the papers one by one. The first sheet listed authorized contacts. Elaine's name still appeared in the history column, then a handwritten note about treatment period assistance, then Caroline retained as the household coordination contact. There were dates beside each edition, small dates, practical dates, dates that meant nothing until they meant everything. The second sheet was a pickup log, medication name date pickup. Under Pickup by C. Bishop or T. Weller. More C. Bishop than T. Weller. Far more over the last year. The third page contained note snippets from refill calls. Called by daughter. Requested reminder. Stated patient resting. Confirmed no questions. Household aware of change. Household aware. I stared at the phrase until the letters blurred. A household is not a person. It has no mouth. Yet there it was, acting in my place. Tom. I looked up. Lydia had come around the end of the counter and was standing just within the alcove, not crowding me. What happens? I said slowly, when a household becomes aware of things a man is not aware of. Lydia's face tightened. Then the household has ceased to be a neutral word. I folded the papers carefully back into the envelope. Do you know an estate attorney named Martin Givens? I asked. She nodded. Downtown office over the old travel agency. Would he remember Elaine if he met her? Yes. He remembers everybody. That was enough for the moment. When I got home, the house was empty. Caroline had taken Nora to school and gone, I assumed, to the grocery, or the dry cleaner, or one of the other practical circuits by which she laid claim to being indispensable. The silence that met me inside was deeper than the quiet after a normal school drop-off. It had the feeling of a stage between scenes where props remain and intention lingers. I did not go to the kitchen first. I went upstairs to Elaine's room. The chair was still facing the room. I had not moved it that morning. That was my first deliberate decision, not to reset it, not yet. Instead, I stood in the doorway and took in the whole arrangement as it presented itself. The bed was smooth. The mirror caught cloudy noonlight from the window. The cardigan was gone from the banister because I had carried it down to my car and put it in the trunk after leaving the pharmacy. The vanity drawer stood a fraction open. I crossed the room and opened it fully. The polishing cloth lay on top. Beneath it, the porcelain dish with Elaine's earrings, her old cuticle scissors, a packet of tissues gone yellow at the folds. But shoved toward the back under the cloth was a lipstick tube I had never seen before. Drugstore brand pale mauve cap, no label on the side. I uncapped it. The shade was wrong for Elaine. Too pink, too dry-looking, but close enough to the smear I had wiped off the mirror that morning to make my teeth clench. I put the cap back on and laid the tube on the vanity in plain sight. Then I looked at the mirror. Signature object, Daniel might have called it, if he were the sort of man who used dramatic terms for household things. That mirror had been memory until yesterday. Sentiment, grief, furniture. Now it had become something else entirely. Not just proof, worse than proof, a testing instrument. Whoever handled it downstairs or turned it wrong upstairs was telling me with every touch who believed the room belonged to them to use. I took Daniel's legal pad out of my coat pocket and wrote in block letters, "Lipstick tube found in vanity drawer. Not Elaine's." Then I turned the mirror deliberately toward the window and left the room. That afternoon I went downtown to Martin Givens's office. It sat above what had once been a travel agency and was now some kind of boutique tax service, the stairwell smelling of old paper and winter boots. Martin Givens was 68, stooped in the shoulders, and wore suspenders with tiny sailboats on them because he had been making the same joke about retirement for 12 years and saw no reason to stop. He remembered me at once and seemed genuinely sorry to hear why I had come. Elaine was one of the sharpest clients I ever had, who insisted on pretending she wasn't sharp. He said, settling behind his desk. "Can I offer you coffee?" "No." "Good. It's terrible." He had Elaine's file in storage, but enough memory to talk before the file arrived from the back room. Most of what he recalled was ordinary estate work. Wills, beneficiary updates, the trust we never quite finished revising after Caroline's divorce because then Elaine got sicker and every errand in life began to need triage. But when I asked whether Elaine had ever expressed concern about me being administratively bypassed in my own home, Martin stopped tapping his pen. "Yes," he said. He did not have to think. I sat very still. She raised it obliquely. First he went on. Asked about occupancy household decision authority, what kinds of arrangements adult children often make when they move back into a parent's home after a death. I told her every family is different, and the law mostly wakes up late to domestic drift unless somebody documents concerns early. Domestic drift, I said. That's the profession finding polite names for ugly things. His assistant brought in the file, then thick with tabs and sticky flags. Martin opened it, turning pages with the patient fingers of a man used to finding someone's life in paper clips. Here, he said after a minute. He rotated the file toward me. There, in his own notes from a meeting with Elaine 8 months before she died, was a line underlined twice in blue. Client, concerned spouse, may defer too easily to daughter in household matters once client deceased. Asked reways to preserve husband's daily decision flow / independent domestic standing if help becomes managerial. The words were ugly in their neatness. Daily decision flow, independent domestic standing, help becomes managerial. No wife in the world who believed her husband fully safe inside the future of his own home would ask a lawyer that. I must have made some sound because Martin closed the file a little and leaned back. I take it you did not know, she asked this. No. I'm sorry. I looked out the office window toward the courthouse clock across the square. The hands were at 2:17. A delivery truck idled at the curb. Somewhere downstairs a printer spat paper in hard, short bursts. Did she say why, I asked. She said enough to concern me, and not enough to let me intervene socially, if that's what you mean. Martin rested both palms on the file. She was not accusing Caroline of a crime. She was worried about a temperament. Her word, not mine. She said your daughter was very competent and had begun speaking about the house as though efficiency were the same thing as rightful control. I laughed once. It sounded like a cough. Martin went on more gently. Elaine also said she feared you would interpret any conflict about that as unpleasantness best avoided. She said you often prefer accommodation to escalation. I sat there and let the humiliation do its work. There is no dignity in pretending certain truths do not wound you. Elaine had known me accurately enough to worry for me, and I had loved her accurately enough to miss what she was telling me. Did she finish anything, I asked after a while? Any document? Any instruction? Martin shook his head. Not in a form you can wave around. She wanted to talk more after treatment. She never got well enough. He paused. There was one thing. What, she asked, whether domestic authority can be preserved through custom as much as through documents. I looked at him. I told her the law prefers paper, but households often live by custom. Who answers the door? Who opens the mail? Who handles the calendar? Who uses which room? She smiled and said, Yes, that's what I thought. When I left his office, the air outside had gone colder, and the sky had dropped low over the town in one flat sheet of gray. I sat in my car for a long time with the engine off. Elaine had tried to preserve me through custom, not through a melodramatic letter, not by stashing secrets in a drawer, through who answered the door, who handled the calendar, who used which room. I had called those things habits, preferences, tidiness, fussing. She had called them a house. By the time I got home, the front windows were lit. Nora's backpack was in the hall. The smell of tomato soup and grilled cheese sat in the air with the day's first dark. The domestic warmth of it hit me so hard, I nearly lost my nerve. That is the difficulty in stories like this, though nobody ever says it neatly. Betrayal rarely arrives in a cold room. It arrives with supper on the stove. Nora was on the living room floor with a library book open in front of her. Caroline was in the kitchen at the stove stirring soup with one hand and checking something on her phone with the other. She looked up when I came in. You were out a while, she said. I had things to do. Could have told me. I hung my coat on the rack thinking of Martin Gibbons saying custom is a form of authority. I had not told her. The fact had weight. You could have told me too, I said. Her gaze held mine for a second. Then she turned back to the soup. Dinner in 10. I went to the dining room sideboard and slid my stack of papers deeper beneath the placemats. That was another deliberate move. I no longer intended to carry outrage into rooms unarmed. Supper itself was unbearable in the quietest way. Nora talked about a girl in her class who brought a ferret for show and tell. Caroline asked follow-up questions in her warm mother voice. The grilled cheese was cut diagonally the way Nora liked it. The tomato soup had basil in it because Elaine always put basil in hers, and Caroline had picked up the habit. Every now and then Nora would glance between us with the quick attention of a child measuring barometric pressure. No argument came, no accusation. Yet I felt the whole meal balanced on top of facts no one at the table was naming. At one point, Caroline said I may stop by the church office tomorrow. They still have some of Mom's meal train paperwork. Maybe I can see if Marjorie was ever officially listed and put an end to this. I looked up. You're doing me a favor now. I'm trying to solve a problem. Which problem? She set her spoon down carefully. The one where a woman showed up here looking like she'd been through a costume box and upset my child. Our eyes held. Nora's spoon stilled in the soup. Caroline saw that and smiled at her at once. Eat, baby. No raised voices, no open war. Yet I understood something then that made the room feel smaller. Caroline could move between registers faster than anyone else in the house. She could address me as obstacle Nora, as comfort object, the soup as supper, the entire scene as normal, all without leaving her chair. That was power too. Not dramatic power, domestic power. The ability to define what kind of moment everyone else was allowed to be in. After supper, Nora asked if she could draw with chalk on the front walk because the rain had finally stopped. Caroline said not after dark. I nearly overruled her on reflex just to hear myself do it, but stopped. Strategic moves are not tantrums. Elaine would have known that instantly. I was still learning. Instead, I said, "Bring the chalk box here." Nora got it from the hall closet shelf and carried it to the table. A cardboard box of thick sidewalk chalk, some broken, some whole, all dusted over with one another's colors. I set it beside my plate. When did you use these on the stairs? I asked. Caroline's head snapped up. What? Nora looked stricken. I kept my voice level. Blue marks on the stair treads. I saw them this afternoon. Nora's eyes went straight to her mother. There were no chalk marks on the stairs, Caroline said. There were. Caroline asked. The child looked trapped. Don't, I said to Caroline, and something in my tone must have finally escaped the soft cage we had both been pretending not to notice because she went still. I turned to Nora. It's all right. Nora's small fingers pressed into the chalk box lid. I was making lines. What kind of lines? She swallowed. Just lines. Why on the stairs, I don't know. Caroline stood and took the box from the table, not sharply. Not in punishment, just removing the item as if tidying the scene. Enough. She's 7. Yes, I said. She is. The sentence hung there longer than it should have. That night, after Nora was asleep, Caroline found me in the parlor. I was sitting in Elaine's old chair by the front window with the room dark except for the street lamp glow through the curtains. I had wanted to sit in the room without using its new folding table, its printer, its bins. I wanted to feel whether the old arrangement could still be recovered by the body, if not yet by the furniture. Caroline stood in the doorway. Are you trying to frighten me? She asked. No, because you're doing an excellent job of acting like a man who's decided the women in his house are up to something. The women in his house? Not my daughter and granddaughter. Not family. A category. I said, sit down. She did not. Why did you tell Nora not to let Marjorie ring twice? Her face gave me almost nothing. She told you that. She's a child, Caroline. Children speak when people stop using them as weather vanes. She crossed her arms. Marjorie has shown up before, once when Nora was home. I told Nora if she saw her on the walk, get me before the bell. That's called protecting a child from a disruptive adult. Has she been inside? No. You're lying. That landed harder than I expected, maybe because I had never said it to her that way in my life. Caroline did not flare. She did not rant. She became quieter. You need to be very careful, she said, about what story you think you're finding here. I leaned forward in Elaine's chair. That's exactly what your mother was worried about. For the first time that evening, she looked genuinely unprepared. What I saw Martin Givens today. Her expression changed in stages too fast to separate surprise, calculation, then offense. Why on earth would you do that? Because Lydia Keene told me Elaine asked how to stop help from becoming control. Martin had notes. Caroline took one step into the room. Mom was sick. Yes. She was frightened. Yes. She said all kinds of things in that period. I stood up then. No, I said. She did not. The room seemed to go very still around us. Even the street outside had quieted. No passing car, no neighbor dog. Just the two of us in the room Elaine had once used for reading and Christmas cards and waiting for me to come home from work. Caroline lowered her voice further. You are taking scraps from outsiders and weaving them into a theory about your own daughter. I am taking records and notes and the words of my wife and asking why my life seems to pass through your hands before it reaches me. That is what happens when someone has to keep a house running. No. That is what happens when someone mistakes running a house for owning the people in it. Her face drained. Not with guilt. With fury denied the pleasure of noise. For a long second I thought she might finally shout. Instead, she said, You really don't know what it takes. Do you want to keep things from falling apart around you? The sentence was so raw, so unexpectedly bare under all the usual composure, that for one instant I saw not just my daughter as she had become, but the little girl she had been, 10 years old, standing in this very room after one of Elaine's Christmas parties, furious because the adults had admired the decorations and the menu and the smoothness of the evening, while she had spent all day fetching ice and folding napkins, and nobody had said a word. Elaine later told me Caroline did not mind work. She minded invisible work. I had forgotten that. But pain does not excuse what it chooses for a language. You are not the only person who ever held this house together, I said. Her lips parted, then closed again. The next moment she smiled. It was the most frightening thing she had done yet, because the smile was controlled, courteous, and entirely without warmth. You should get some sleep, she said. You're not thinking clearly. Then she turned and left. I did not follow her. I stood in the dark parlor until I could hear only the refrigerator and the faint rattling of pipes. That was the point at which my hope that all of this might still be ugly but accidental finally began to die. Not because Caroline got angry. Anger is human. Because she heard her dead mother's concerns repeated back to her and chose with that terrible calm, not grief or confusion or even defense, but management. Sleep. Clarity, story, language meant to recategorize me. When I went upstairs later, I did not go straight to bed. I went to Elaine's room with Daniel's legal pad and the brown pharmacy envelope and the copy of Martin Givens' note I had talked him into letting me photograph. I spread them on the vanity bench. Then I opened the hall closet, the linen closet, the cedar chest at the bottom, and every drawer in Elaine's dresser. This was not ransacking. That is too energetic a word. It was something sadder and more precise. I was learning to look for the signs of one household arranged inside another. In the cedar chest I found winter blankets, a stack of old table runners, 2 photo albums, and a zippered cosmetic pouch I did not recognize. Inside the pouch were things no husband wants to hold up in the half-light and reason through a cheap powder compact, bobby pins the same wrong shade of lipstick, a pale brown eyebrow pencil, and a packet of foam hair rollers. Not Elaine's things, not her brands, not her habits, not the quality she bought even when money was tight. At the bottom of the pouch lay a folded index card in Caroline's hand. Low bun. Side part. No bright lip. Cardigan/scarf if cold. I sat down on the bed because my knees would no longer do business with me standing up. There it was. Not resemblance happened upon. Not grief-making patterns from coincidence. Instructions. A plain little preparation card written like a grocery reminder. I read it 3 times. Low bun. Side part. No bright lip. Cardigan/scarf if cold. The room around me seemed both distant and viciously near. The mirror on the vanity caught part of the bed. The chair faced the room still. The cushion beneath me gave in the shape Elaine and I had made together over years, and the cosmetic pouch sat in my lap like something filthy lifted from a church. Caroline had planned the likeness, maybe not in full, maybe not at first. Maybe she had only noticed it once and discovered its usefulness later. Those are the kinds of distinctions decent people reach for because they hope evil has stages and therefore can be interrupted halfway. But the card existed. The pouch existed. The staged image at the door had not been one disturbed woman's improvisation. It had been prepared. I thought of Nora on the stairs with the chalk lines, of Daniel on the porch being told I was resting, of Lydia's pickup logs, of Elaine at the sink tapping a dish towel against her palm while I mistook her caution for fussiness. My pain changed shape then. It stopped being mostly shame and became something morally cleaner and more dangerous. Not rage, not yet. Refusal. I set the pouch on the vanity and wrote on the legal pad in letters so hard the page tore slightly beneath the pen, cosmetic pouch in cedar chest. Index card in Caroline's handwriting, re-hair/lip/cardigan. Then I did the most deliberate thing I had done in years. I put everything back exactly as I had found it, except for one thing. I carried the silver mirror to the vanity edge, turned it fully toward the window, the way Elaine always had, and placed the lipstick tube directly in front of it at the center line of the glass. Not hidden, not dramatic, visible. Then I left the room and went to bed. It was, I knew, a test, if the room was now merely a room. Everyone used without significance, the mirror would remain. The lipstick tube would remain, and the angle would mean nothing. If the room was still being entered for purposes Caroline preferred unnamed, if it was part shrine, part storage, part stage set, part claimed ground, then something would change by morning. I slept better than I had the previous night, which tells you something ugly and useful about the human nervous system. Once a person chooses a course, fear often gives way to function. At some point before dawn, I woke to the sound of floorboards above my head. That cannot be right, you will think, above his head. But the room Elaine and I slept in was on the 2nd floor with a low attic crawl above it, accessible only through a hall hatch, and old houses carry sound strangely. The step or shift or scrape seemed to come from overhead and then to settle into the walls. I lay still, listening. Nothing followed. Rain ticked once against the gutter. Somewhere on the block, a dog barked in its sleep and stopped. The house held its breath. I got up at 6. The upstairs hall was dim blue with morning not yet committed to being morning. My bare feet felt each cool board through the runner gaps. I reached Elaine's room and stopped in the doorway. The mirror was facing the room. Not a little, not halfway. Fully turned inward, angled, so that anyone sitting in the chair would see herself cleanly in the glass. The lipstick tube was gone. For a second I did not move. Not because I doubted what I was seeing, but because the sight of it landed with the force of a hand placed flat against my chest. There is a particular violence in being answered without a word. I crossed the room slowly. The chair had been pulled closer to the vanity. On the bench lay the polishing cloth unfolded. And in the mirror, with the pale gray dawn behind me, I saw my own face change as the last of my old false belief gave way. Someone had entered Elaine's room after I set the test. Someone had understood exactly what I was saying by the mirror's angle. And someone had turned it back toward the room anyway. I stood in the doorway of Elaine's room with the morning cold around my ankles and felt the last of my indecision go out of me. The mirror faced the room, not by accident, not by the drift of a loose hand. It had been turned with intention, the angle precise enough to catch the vanity bench and the chair drawn closer, as if the whole little arrangement meant to receive someone. The polishing cloth lay unfolded like a napkin after use. The lipstick tube was gone. Whoever had come in here before dawn had understood the room as a place they could answer me. That was the point at which fear became something more useful. I did not touch a thing at first. I went back downstairs, put water on for coffee, and called Daniel Mercer before 7. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Tom, I need you here this morning." That woke him fully. "What happened?" She turned the mirror back. There was a short silence. "Then I'll be there in 20. I called Lydia next. She was already at the pharmacy, but had not yet opened the front shutters. "I need you as a witness," I said. "That bad?" "Yes." Another pause, brief but weighted. "Give me 30 minutes. The third call cost me more than the first two combined. Martin Givens answered from his office line, sounding surprised to be in before regular hours. When I told him I needed him at the house, he said, "Am I coming as your attorney or as the man who remembers your wife?" "Both," I said. He did not ask for more. By 7:45, the coffee was made. The breakfast room table was set with 4 mugs instead of 1, and I had placed Daniel's legal pad, Lydia's envelope, and the photographed attorney note in a neat stack on the dining room sideboard. I also did one other thing. I went out to the hall closet and got Nora's chalk box. I took it to the front walk and set it on the top step beside the porch rail where she would see it if she looked out the window after school. Not because I intended to make a symbol of it, because the box had become in my mind connected with the way a child had tried to mark the house into something understandable. I did not know what healing would look like yet, but I knew it would have to make room for her. When I came back inside, Caroline was standing in the kitchen doorway in her robe hair. Loose eyes narrowed, not with sleep, but with assessment. "Who did you call?" she asked. It was striking, after all the days of half-truth and diversion, how quickly she landed on the right question. I poured coffee into my mug. "Good morning. Who did you call?" "People who know enough to help." Her gaze flicked past me toward the hall, then toward the stairs, then back. She had already sensed some alteration in the weather of the house. "Competent people feel that first. They live by it." "You called Daniel," she said. "Yes." She drew a breath through her nose. "Because of the mirror." I looked at her. That landed too. She had named it before I did. Caroline understood what the mirror meant. Not abstractly, practically. She knew it had become the battlefield and had accepted that fact by speaking it aloud. "Get Nora dressed," I said. "I'll take her to school." That startled her in a way nothing else had yet. "You don't take her to school." "I do today. I already have the morning planned." "That's too bad." She stepped into the kitchen in bare feet, robe belt pulled tighter. "Dad, if you intend to parade people through this house because you've decided to test me with furniture placement, you need to stop and think about what that will do to Nora." There it was again. The smooth turn outward, the claim that the child's safety was threatened not by the system that had trained her to whisper at thresholds, but by the naming of it. "I am thinking about Nora," I said. "No, you're thinking about Mom. My wife is the reason you were able to build this in the first place." For the first time in days, Caroline's calm shifted enough for something raw to show underneath. "Build what I put my mug down." "Enough," I said. "Enough of acting like confusion is happening to you from outside. You knew exactly what the mirror meant. You knew exactly why Marjorie came dressed that way. You knew exactly why Nora told me not to answer the door. We are past the stage where you get to ask me what I think I'm seeing." Caroline held my gaze. Her face had gone very still, which was always more dangerous than anger with her. Then she said very quietly, "If you bring people into this house and accuse me of something filthy because you cannot tolerate that your life changed after Mom died, you will regret it." It was the closest she had yet come to a threat. Before I could answer, Nora came into the kitchen in her socks, holding her backpack by one strap. She stopped when she saw our faces. The child had learned too much already. You could see it in the way she read the room before she spoke. I went to her and crouched. "You and I are going to school together today." She searched my face. "Just us?" "Yes." She looked at Carolyn. Caroline smiled at once, the smile of a mother not wanting to alarm her child. "Grandpa's feeling dramatic this morning." Nora said nothing. I rose and turned to Carolyn. "You will stay here." "Excuse me." "You heard me. You cannot order me around in my own." She stopped herself before the sentence finished. "In my own what?" The incomplete line hung between us like exposed wire. Nora heard it too. I saw it in her eyes. Something in me settled more deeply. Not rage, not triumph, the terrible relief of clarity. The doorbell rang at 7:59. Caroline flinched before she could hide it. I did not look at her. I walked to the front hall and opened the door. Daniel stood there in his coat, legal seriousness already on his face. Behind him, halfway up the walk, were Lydia Keene in her rust sweater and Martin Givens with his overcoat buttoned wrong in his haste. Marjorie Pell stood near the gate, not close enough to presume, not far enough to flee, her cheap vinyl handbag hanging from one wrist, and fear written all over her. Caroline made a soft sound behind me. Not surprised this time. Fury denied oxygen. Daniel looked past me once enough to take in the hall and whoever stood inside it. Then he said, "Morning, Tom." "Come in." Lydia and Martin followed. Marjorie hesitated at the threshold. I stepped aside and held the door wider. "You too," I said. She looked at Caroline before she moved. That look told the whole structure in 1 second. Not all of it, not enough for law, but enough for any human heart still attached to a pair of eyes. Marjorie had been trained on Caroline's permission too. Caroline's voice came from behind me, colder than I had yet heard it. "This is insane." "No," I said, still looking at Marjorie. "This is the first honest morning this house has had in a long time." Marjorie came inside. Nora stood at the edge of the breakfast room with both hands wrapped around one backpack strap. Daniel saw her and softened immediately. "Morning, kiddo." She did not answer. She looked at the adults the way children do when they are trying to map danger by posture. I crossed to her. "Get your shoes on, honey," Dad, Caroline said. I turned. "We are not doing this in front of her." I said, "That would have been a good principle to keep earlier." Martin Givens drew in a breath behind me. Lydia looked down once, not in shame, but in the old professional way of bracing herself before truth enters a room and starts breaking furniture. Nobody wants broken. Caroline lifted her chin. She had gone fully composed now, the robe replaced by the attitude she wore best when systems were slipping, exact, cool, aggrieved. "What exactly?" she said. "Do you imagine is happening here?" I looked at Daniel. "Please take Nora to the breakfast room for a minute." "No," Nora said suddenly, so soft that all of us turned toward her. It was the first time I had heard her contradict her mother in days. Nora's face had gone pale again, freckles standing out. She looked not at Caroline, but at me. "I want to stay with Grandpa." That cost her. I could see the cost in the tremor at the corner of her mouth. Caroline opened her mouth, probably to say something soothing and narrowing at once, but I beat her to it. "She stays with me." Then, before Caroline could absorb an answer, I did the thing I had understood sometime after midnight I would have to do if I wanted any of this to stick. I said, "We're going upstairs." The sentence changed the house. Everything up to that moment might still have been argued as overreaction in a kitchen misunderstanding at a doorway, paperwork drift in a breakfast room. Upstairs was different. Upstairs was Elaine's geography, the part of the house that still knew the old order in its walls. Caroline knew it too. I saw it in how quickly her eyes sharpened. "This is absurd," she said. "Maybe." Come find out. I took Nora's hand in mine and started up the stairs. Daniel came behind us. Lydia and Martin followed. Marjorie lingered, then came 2 each step, sounding careful on the runner. Caroline remained in the front hall for half a beat longer than the rest, as if deciding whether to refuse and thereby surrender the ground or comply and risk what the room might say. Then she came. No one spoke on the stairs. The 3rd step from the top creaked under my weight, then Daniel's. Nora pressed close to my side. Her hand was small and dry and very tight in mine. When we reached Elaine's doorway, the room took us all in at once, the bed, the vanity, the chair drawn close, the mirror facing into the room, the polishing cloth unfolded the pale daylight at the windows. The space looked peaceful to anyone entering blind. That was the obscenity of it. Control likes good upholstery. I let go of Nora's hand only long enough to move the chair aside so everyone could see the vanity clearly. Caroline stood in the doorway with her robe folded across herself like armor. "Well," she said, "there are moments in a man's life when the whole future of his dignity depends on whether he speaks plainly or reaches for one more gentler phrase." I had reached for gentler phrases long enough. "This room," I said, "has been used." No one moved. Caroline gave one short, incredulous laugh. "Of course it's been used. We live in a house." "No. This room has been used to replace my wife when it suited your purposes and to answer me when I noticed." "That is disgusting." "Yes," I said, "it is." That checked her for a fraction of a second. I stepped to the vanity and picked up the polishing cloth. Beneath it, I had placed before going downstairs the lipstick tube I found in the drawer and the folded index card from the cosmetic pouch. I laid both on the vanity top, where everyone could see them. Lydia frowned. Martin went very still. Daniel's mouth flattened. Marjorie closed her eyes for a second, as if something she had dreaded had finally been spoken in its full language. Caroline did not look at the card. That was the first true crack. "I said I found this in Elaine's cedar chest last night. Along with the pouch these came from." Now she looked, not with curiosity, with the recognition of a general whose map has fallen into enemy hands. Martin spoke quietly. "Caroline." She turned to him at once, outraged but controlled. "You should be ashamed of yourself for participating in this." "Participating in what?" he asked. "In humiliating me because my father has decided grief makes him a detective." I said no. Grief made me a widower. Sequence made me a detective. Then I began. I do not know where the words came from, except that they had been waiting, and once I started, I did not give her the gaps she had always used to step in and rename a room before I finished speaking. I laid it out, piece by piece. The mirror downstairs where it never belonged. The chair turned wrong, the lipstick smear. The cardigan in the linen closet. The appointment card. The pharmacy designation. Daniel turned away from the porch. Nora told not to let the bell ring twice. Marjorie arriving dressed in a way that was not resemblance but instruction. Lydia's pickup logs. Martin's notes from Elaine's meetings. The cosmetic pouch. The index card. The test with the mirror turned toward the window and the answer given before dawn when it was turned back to face the room. Each piece by itself might have been explained away. Together in Elaine's room with the silver mirror between us, they became a structure. Caroline tried to interrupt twice. The first time, I simply spoke over her. The second time, Daniel said in the voice that must once have frozen middle school cafeterias at 20 paces, "Let him finish." That silenced her in a way shouting never could have. Nora did not understand every word. She was 7, not 17, but she understood the shape of it, that adults were finally speaking the thing that had bent the air in the house. She stood beside Lydia now, very straight, both hands gripping the straps of her backpack. When I finished, no one spoke for several long seconds. Then Caroline did what she always did when cornered without a clean exit. She became exquisitely reasonable. "All right," she said softly. "Let's suppose for a moment that every odd little domestic detail Dad has obsessed over this week means exactly what he claims. What would that amount to?" That I tried too hard to manage things after Mom died. That I relied on routines because without routines this house would have collapsed into grief and unpaid bills and moldy food and one old man sitting in the dark talking to her picture. Fine. I did. Someone had to. Her voice was steady. No tears, no theatrics. It made her more frightening, not less. She looked at Daniel. You know he forgets things. Daniel did not answer. At Lydia. You know half your notes come from whoever picks up the phone first. Lydia said nothing. At Martin. You know Mom was scared near the end and asked questions about everything. Still nothing. So she turned to me. You want the ugliest version. Here it is. I came back because this house was dying with her. You would have let it. You would have drifted from chair to chair in your robe and called that loyalty. I made it livable. I made it run. I made sure Nora had structure. I made sure you took your medication. I made sure the bills got paid and the school forms got signed and the world did not have to witness you slowly disappearing because that is what would have happened if I hadn't taken hold. She had finally said it. Taken hold. I looked at her and saw with a clarity so complete it almost felt merciful that this was not about money first, not even about the house first. It was about possession through usefulness, about being the one through whom reality had to pass. And Marjorie, I asked. A flicker, then composure again. A mistake. Marjorie let out a small broken laugh from the doorway. Caroline turned toward her. You were paid to drop off food and to stop drinking before noon. Don't dress this up into anything grander. That landed like a slap, not because it was shouted, but because it was meant to reduce Marjorie to a disposable tool in front of witnesses. Marjorie's face crumpled, then steadied in a way I had not seen before. No, Marjorie said, and her voice shook only at the first word. No, you don't get to do that now. She stepped farther into the room. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked directly at Caroline instead of around her. You told me he was slipping, she said. You told me he didn't know what was real anymore, and that if he saw me it might force a conversation you didn't know how to have. You told me the resemblance might help him face what he was refusing to face. Caroline smiled thinly. And you believed that because you wanted the cash? Yes, Marjorie said. I did. At first. Her throat worked. Then I saw Nora. That changed the room. Nora looked up. Marjorie swallowed hard. She was watching the front door from the hallway before anybody rang it. Like a little sentry, she checked your face before she said anything. I knew then this wasn't about helping him face grief. It was about keeping everybody arranged. Caroline's voice went cold enough to frost glass. You were never inside this house. Marjorie blinked, then looked at me. It was Daniel who answered. That's not what Nora said. The child shrank a little at hearing herself implied, and I moved at once, crossing the room to put my body slightly in front of her without making a show of it. Caroline saw the move. The expression that crossed her face then was not love, not anger, not even panic. It was insult. She had lost access. Nora, she said. The child did not answer. Nora, look at me. I said no. Caroline's head snapped toward me. No, I repeated. You do not get to use her eyes right now to find your footing. The room went so still I could hear the ticking of Elaine's travel alarm clock in the top dresser drawer. Caroline laughed once under her breath, a sound almost devoid of humor. So, this is what we're doing, turning me into some kind of monster in front of my own daughter. No, I said. I'm naming what you did in front of the people who can stop you from doing it again. That was my moment. Not because I shouted, because I did not. Because for the first time since Elaine died, I heard my own voice in the house, and it belonged there. I went back to the vanity and laid out the rest. The pharmacy pages, the pickup logs, the attorney note, Daniel's legal pad with dates and observations, the appointment cards Caroline had pre-handled, the electric bill already opened and paid. The school form referring to me as resident support under household adults. Martin confirmed the note in his file. Lydia confirmed the gradual shift in who spoke for me. Daniel confirmed being turned away at the porch. Marjorie confirmed the coached likeness and Caroline's instructions. Each witness took one piece. No speeches, no melodrama. That was what made the truth stronger. Nobody needed to embellish. The room had already been doing that on Caroline's behalf for too long. At last, I said, "You did not care for me. You arranged me." Caroline closed her eyes. When she opened them, the mask finally failed. Not in screaming, not in collapse, in contempt. "You are impossible," she said. "Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to keep a man like you from falling behind his own life?" There it was. Plain. Uncovered. The thing under all the soft correction and practical efficiency and burdened daughter patience. Not concern. Disdain. "No," I said. "I know how exhausting it is to be reduced by someone who calls it love." Nora made a sound then small and raw. I looked back and saw tears on her face she had not noticed herself. Lydia reached for her hand. The child took it without looking away from us. That sight did what argument had not yet done. It made the cost visible. Caroline saw it too. For one flashing instant, she looked shaken. Truly shaken. Then she did something that might in another family have been an appeal. "Nora," she said softly. "Honey, this is adults, misunderstanding each other." Nora spoke so quietly we all leaned to hear. "You said not to let the lady in." Caroline swallowed. "Because she told lies. You said Grandpa gets mixed up." Another swallow. "You said if people asked questions, I should get you first. No one in that room will forget the sound of those words in that child's voice. The greatest damage in families is often done in gentle language. To hear it, returned by a 7-year-old without inflection, was more devastating than any accusation." Caroline looked at her daughter, and for the first time all morning, had no answer ready. That was the collapse. Not a confession, not a scream. The failure of the management system when the child it had trained simply repeated its instructions under witness. Martin cleared his throat and spoke in the legal voice I imagine he usually reserved for men who thought charm was a form of compliance. "Caroline, I'm advising you now as someone present and as the attorney who documented your mother's concerns that you need to step back from all decision-making on your father's behalf immediately." Caroline turned on him. "You represent him, not me." "That is correct. And you think barging into my home," Martin said. "This is not your home." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The sentence landed with more force than any threat of police could have. Because that was the hidden claim under everything, wasn't it? Not just to run the house, but to become its defining authority by function, then by language, then by assumed right. Caroline went white. Daniel stepped in, then not physically between anyone, but enough into the room that its lines of power shifted again. "Nora is coming with me for the day," he said. "What?" Caroline snapped. Lydia answered before Daniel could. "No, she is not staying in this room while you decide whether reality applies to you." The bluntness of that from Lydia, of all people, seemed to jolt Caroline more than the rest had. "I am her mother." "Yes," Lydia said, "and that is exactly why you should not be the only adult speaking for her at this moment." Caroline looked from face to face and finally seemed to understand that the old tools were failing one by one. Soft correction, burdened competence, injury, reasonable irritation, none of it was re-establishing the room. She did not scream. That would have been easier to survive. Instead, she said with quiet venom, "You all wanted a villain. Congratulations." I shook my head. "No, we wanted the house back." For the first time since the morning began, her face broke. Not into grief, into a kind of bleak, furious disbelief that the world had refused to keep rewarding her methods. She sat down abruptly on the edge of the bedrobe, pulling open at one knee, and covered her mouth with her hand. I do not know whether she was stopping herself from saying something worse or holding in something like sobbing. Maybe both. I looked at her and felt at last the full double weight of the thing. She was my daughter. She was also the architect of what had happened here. Love did not vanish under that fact, but it changed species. It became Griever's love, stripped of illusion. I crossed to Nora. "Get your coat," I said gently. "Go with Mr. Mercer for a while." Nora looked at Caroline, then at me. Then she nodded. As Daniel led her out, she paused at the doorway and looked back into Elaine's room with the solemnity of a child trying to remember the shape of the place where adults finally told the truth. Then she went. What followed took hours. Martin made calls from the downstairs phone. Not dramatic ones, necessary ones. He arranged for a temporary advisory note regarding any representation or scheduling done on my behalf, contacted a family services colleague about best practices where a child had been placed in a coercive communication role, and dictated a memorandum while I sat in the dining room signing what needed signing. Lydia remained long enough to inventory the practical medical issues with me directly and to state in front of Carolyn that all future pharmacy contact would come to me first unless I explicitly instructed otherwise in writing. Daniel returned just before noon after settling Nora at his sister's house with coloring books and grilled cheese. He came back with coffee and the sort of grave steadiness a man borrows when somebody else's life has just broken open on the floor. Caroline stayed upstairs for nearly an hour, then came down dressed and carrying 2 suitcases. There was no scene. That too mattered. Justice in houses like this rarely looks cinematic. It looks logistical, a suitcase wheel knocking once against a stair, a drawer emptied, a toothbrush taken from a cup, a child's sneakers retrieved from under a bench, the terrible humility of domestic consequence. She stopped in the front hall with the suitcases beside her. "I'll take Nora's things later," she said. Martin answered before I could. "You'll do that by arrangement?" She looked at me then. Not at Martin, not at Lydia, not at Daniel. At me. There were 50 things I might have said if I had wanted to hurt her. I said none of them. I had no interest in revenge by flourish. Elaine deserved better than flourish in this house. I said, "Your mother knew the difference between helping and replacing. That is what you never forgave her for." Caroline's face changed in a way I had not yet seen. Not collapse, not fury, but a glimpse of a much younger pain looking out through all the practiced control. Then it was gone. "You always made her the saint," she said. "No," I said. "I made the mistake of thinking she was merely better at keeping a house than I was. I did not understand that she was protecting the people in it." Caroline looked away first. When the front door closed behind her, the house did not feel relieved. That would be too simple. It felt exposed. You can remove the architect of a false order and still be left standing in all the marks where she leaned. The hall table still held the groove from the missing printer cord. The kitchen nook still looked like a command station. The front parlor still had its bins and the folding table by the window. The house was not healed by departure. It was merely no longer arguing with me about what had happened. Lydia left around 1 after making me promise to eat. Martin left after that with a packet of temporary paperwork and 3 separate warnings not to sign anything anyone brought to the house without reading it with him present. Daniel stayed. We sat in the breakfast room with tomato soup warmed from the pot Caroline had made that morning. Neither of us commented on the fact. The basil still tasted like Elaine's version. That nearly undid me more than anything else had. At one point, Daniel said, "You did exactly right." I looked at my spoon. "Too late." He shook his head. "Late is not the same as never." I wanted to believe him. I am not sure I entirely did, but the sentence helped. The afternoon was given over to reclamation in the least glamorous sense. We did not redecorate the house like victorious people in a television show. We removed what was plainly part of the control system and left what was merely ordinary life. The folding table came out of the parlor. The printer went into the hall closet. The utility files and medication caddy came off the kitchen desk and onto the dining room table where I could sort them myself. We did not throw away Nora's drawings or her school forms or her library books. This was not a cleansing. It was a correction. Around 3:30, Daniel drove me to his sister's to fetch Nora. She came to the door already wearing her coat and carrying the chalk box against her stomach. When she saw me, she ran the last few feet, not in panic, but in certainty. I knelt and held her. "Are we going home?" she whispered into my shoulder. "Yes." She drew back enough to look at my face. "Is Mom mad?" Children always find the question underneath the visible one. "Your mother is upset," I said. "But you are safe." She nodded as if she had expected nothing else and everything else at once. Back at the house, the first thing she did was stop in the front hall and look up the stairs. "Can I go to Grandma's room?" she asked. That question hurt and healed in the same breath. "Yes," I said. She climbed slowly, not afraid, just solemn. I followed her to the doorway and watched as she went in, stood before the vanity and looked at the mirror. "Is this better?" she asked. The mirror still faced the room. Not for long, I thought. "It will be," I said. She nodded, and then, to my surprise, crossed to the chair and pushed it with both hands until it angled toward the window again. Not perfectly. Child strength left it slightly askew. But enough. I had to turn away for a second. That evening, after Daniel left, and after a quiet supper of reheated soup and toast neither of us particularly tasted, Nora asked if she could draw outside. "It's cold," I said. "I know." I looked at the walk through the front door glass. Damp now, but clear. The sky over the street had gone that soft violet late winter sometimes offers as apology for existing at all. "Get your sweater," I said. She came back with Elaine's old red knit cap on her head, too large and sliding toward one eye. I almost told her to take it off because it had belonged to Elaine, and I was not yet ready to see another person wear it. Then I stopped myself. Possession is not memory. That was part of what I had learned, wasn't it? A thing can carry love without becoming a border checkpoint. So I buttoned her coat instead. She carried the chalk box out to the front walk and crouched where Marjorie had stood that first morning. She did not draw a face. She did not draw a door. She began with lines. Long, pale blue and white lines crossing the damp concrete into boxes, a little roadway, then something like a garden bed on one side. Her breath made clouds in the cooling air. I stood in the doorway a minute, then went back upstairs. Elaine's room was dim with evening. I switched on the bedside lamp, not the vanity lamp. Softer light, more mercy. The room had felt like an argument for 2 days. I wanted selfishly maybe to give it back its manners. I gathered the last of the evidence from the vanity. The lipstick tube, the index card, the pouch. Martin had photographed everything already. The objects looked smaller now that they had lost their power to define the room. Then I picked up the silver mirror. My hands knew its weight. I held it a moment longer than needed, feeling the chill of the metal. The old tiny pits in the back where years had worn through the finish. The familiar give of the hinged stand. I remembered Elaine polishing it in her robe. Remembered how often I had mistaken care for fussing. Remembered the day she turned it toward the morning light and told me a room should never teach a person to vanish in it. I had vanished some after she died, not all at once. That would have been easier to notice. By increments, by courtesy, by gratitude, by not wanting to make trouble. The house had helped me do it because I had stopped paying attention to what it was for. "I'm sorry," I said aloud. Not to the room exactly, to her, to the years I had misunderstood, to the child downstairs who had learned silence in the meantime. Then very carefully I turned the mirror toward the window. The last of the evening light caught in it, not bright just enough. A gentler reflection, not of me, of sky. I opened the window 2 inches the way Elaine liked, even in cold weather. Fresh air in a sleeping room. Another house rule. Another piece of moral geography disguised as preference. From below came the faint scrape of chalk on concrete. I went to the window and looked down. Nora had turned the walkway into a careful patchwork of pale squares and looping paths. At the place near the porch where Marjorie had stood, she had drawn a long white line across the width of the walk, and then opened it in the middle with a little curved gap, as if a barrier had become a doorway after all. I do not know if she meant it that way. Children are often wiser than their explanations and less symbolic than the adults who watch them. But the sight of it sat inside me with a strange, clean tenderness. The room behind me no longer felt staged, not restored. That is too neat a word. Too clean, too proud. The house would never again be simple to me. I would hear certain tones forever. I would notice who reached the door first. I would open my own mail with more force than necessary. I would grieve my daughter in one form, while still hoping somewhere far ahead for another. I would live with the knowledge that Elaine had seen a danger I had not. That does not wash out, because truth wins one day in one room. But the house felt honest again, which is a rarer mercy than happiness, and often enough for a man my age. I stayed at the window until Nora looked up and saw me. She raised one chalky hand in a wave. I raised mine back. Then I turned off the bedside lamp, left the mirror holding the last thin band of sky, and stood in the doorway of Elaine's room one final moment before going downstairs. The front hall was warm. The smell of toast still lingered faintly in the walls from supper. Nora's chalk box sat open on the porch. Her red cap had slipped sideways over one eyebrow. She was humming something tuneless and soft to herself as she drew. I stepped out onto the walk and stood beside her. After a minute, she leaned lightly against my leg without looking up from her chalk. "Grandpa." "Yes." "Can Grandma still see the room?" I looked back at the upstairs window where the curtain moved a little in the evening air. "I don't know," I said, "but I think she'd know it's hers again." Nora seemed to consider that. Then she nodded and returned to her drawing. The reflected light from the bedroom window fell faintly across the glass and onto the dim room beyond, not showing anyone's face now, only carrying the sky inward. And standing there on my own front walk with chalk dust whitening the damp concrete, and the house no longer speaking in somebody else's voice, I felt the kind of peace that does not erase damage, but allows you to live beside it with your back straight.